Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook. Marvel, the Alpha-level regenerative self-healing ability at the beginning. Chapter 1. The human body has infinite possibilities. The ancient celestial group used experimental transformations on human ancestors, so that some lucky ones could awaken through the genetic X gene in their bodies. Some of them could awaken superpowers, making themselves comparable to gods. Because of the uncontrollability of the X gene, some have become alternatives that make ordinary people fear, or monsters. Some of them may have a strong awakening ability, and their strength is close to their appearance, such as beasts and demons. And our little Joaquin is lucky, and at the same time unlucky. Fortunately, he has awakened a super strong self-healing ability. He has been confirmed as an alpha level by X gene testing. You must know that beta level is almost immortal, let alone a theoretically higher alpha level. Unfortunately, he is currently tied to a cold iron bed with bare bones. More than a dozen thick or thin, long or short needles are ready to inject various medicines in his body, including extracts from other mutants. X gene. Tisk tisk tisk. It's the perfect carrier. A man in military uniform stretched out his right hand covered with thick hair, and stroked Joaquin's still immature face with a grin on his face. Your mistake is that you shouldn't tell Jason about your abilities, let alone show off in front of him. He suddenly grabbed Joaquin's neck with force. I hate Jason, but I hate you, an Asian freak, even more. If it weren't for you, Jason wouldn't wake up, let alone drive my wife crazy, and my happy family wouldn't be torn apart. Let's start. In order to carry out the Weapon X project, he had to find Ross to cooperate, but the projects of the two were very expensive. In order to successfully kidnap this well-known rich kid in New York, Ross's help was indispensable. As for the price, it's nothing more than a reduction in the proportion of research funding allocated to the Super Soldier project. Following his order, the two whitecoats were busy in front of the complex instrument. Various buttons were pressed by them one by one. Light green, dark blue, scarlet, and various liquids were injected into Joaquin's body one by one under the impetus of the instrument. These liquids were rushing in his blood vessels. It hurts, ah, Mom. Hum hum hum. Seeing Joaquin, who was unable to move on the test bench, Stryker sneered, Cry, the harm to your body has just begun. When everything was over, one of the assistants came to Stryker with an ugly face, opened his mouth to express a little courage, and retreated like ice and snow melting under Stryker's indifferent eyes. Say, the assistant pointed to little Joaquin with bulging blood vessels, and then pointed to the brain wave device. Colonel, this experimental subject can't bear the pain caused by the genetic modification, and is already brain dead. Okay. Stryker pushed the assistant away and came to the brain wave machine. Looking at the smooth straight lines on it, the corners of his mouth that were originally smiling twitched, and he slapped the table hard with both hands. It's cheap, you little fool. Should the experiment continue? Facing the assistant's question, Stryker glanced at him indifferently. Isn't it better to be brain dead? I heard that the military is researching micro-control chips internally. If it succeeds, it can be used on him. When he came to the edge of the test bench, he looked at Joaquin coldly. Continue to do the experiment that needs to be done. With this obedient and easy to manipulate experimental subject, you can practice boldly with confidence. The alpha-level regenerative self-healing ability is enough for you to perform. As soon as he left the laboratory, a soldier came to him. Colonel, news from Lagos has confirmed that one of the largest local armed forces has discovered the Edmund meteorite you mentioned. Really? That would be nice. Stryker, who finally got the good news, turned his head to look at the laboratory, and then led the soldiers to other passages. Any news about other mutants? The soldier grinned. Of course, in fact, in the military prison in South X, there are two regenerative mutants who disobeyed orders. Colonel, you don't know, they were shot 3 times, with a hole in their head for the 3rd time, but they still survived. The brothers feel incredible and envious. HMPH, it's just a freak. The two walked further and further away, and Joaquin, who had completed the first round of genetic modification, was also replaced by 2 researchers with a nutrient solution bottle, and pushed into an independent space not far away. Click. As the heavy iron door closed, a mass of white light suddenly appeared in the dim space, and penetrated into his little brain. His hands and feet twitched unconsciously and then remained motionless again. In the next 6 years, Stryker relied on this alpha-level regenerated experimental body to successfully train a deputy, allowing him to have more time to search for mutants and cry poor in the military. Due to the shock brought by the Cuban crisis mutant Eric to the Navy and the massacre of the first Sentinels that shocked the world, the Weapon X project has brought broad prospects. The military has invested a lot of money in Stryker's project, and even moved the research base to 3 Mile Island. There are a large number of mutants detained here, and their grades are not low. They are used to collect their X genes and prepare for the subsequent X weapon arsenal. How is he? Stryker looked at the experimental subject on the operating table, and the woman who was transplanting the laser gene to the experimental subject replied without looking up, "It will take several hours." "Will he respond to my orders?" "Of course." After getting an affirmative answer, Stryker looked at the deputy busy with a smile, and said with emotion after a long time, "Now Wade doesn't have to talk anymore, a perfect substitute for X weapon." The deputy carefully pushed the needle tube, and asked casually, "What about experimental no?" 118. "That experimental body is so perfect, I don't want to waste it like this. You must know that there is only so much admin alloy in total. He, Death Girl and Logan have used up the last bit of alloy. When Jason's brain fluid research breaks through again, he can directly inject brain fluid into number 118, which is much more reliable than putting a chip in the brain." Stryker crossed his arms and looked at Wade's rapidly recovering eyelids, but this experimental subject is enough to shut the mouths of those idiots in the military. The deputy nodded and continued his busy work, while Stryker, who was originally indifferent, grinned slightly. "Logan. Welcome back to the battlefield." Logan, the strong man code-named Wolverine, frowned and looked at Stryker in front of him. "Before I cut you open, I want to know why you did this." "I need your power to create weapons." "Create what?" Stryker turned to look at Logan, with a slight grin on the corner of his mouth, and the exposed canine teeth seemed to be shining with a little coldness. "Mutant killer." Deadpool. "After years of research, we finally found several suitable superpowers that can coexist in the same body without causing the body to be torn apart by energy due to the compatibility of the X gene." Glancing at the basically completed experimental body, he turned to Logan. "Joaquin is the framework of this puzzle, my son is the first piece of this puzzle, and you, Logan, the last piece of the puzzle." Looking at Logan's clenched fists, he pursed his lips with regret. "Your genes can't improve the frame, but it makes the 11 weapon possible. I asked you for help, but you said you want a peaceful life. Okay." He slowly walked to the desk and sat down. "I heard that the biggest motivation of your family is revenge." Talking behind him, Logan turned his head to look at the slowly appearing Meowman figure. The resentment in his eyes turned into excitement, and the appearance of the silver fox Kira made him squat down slowly. As the three of them narrated, the assistant on the operating table hurriedly speeded up. She didn't think the lone wolf would be docile. However, Logan, who had been deceived by his feelings, did not go mad in the end. He saw the unresolved sadness and apology in the eyes of his girlfriend who had been dating for more than 5 years. Maybe leaving is the best choice. PFF'd. When Logan's adamantium alloy claws were pulled out from Wade's left rib, he looked at the wound that healed almost instantly, and his eyes were full of bewilderment. "What the hell?" 11 weapon. Wade just glanced at him casually, and then fought with Logan again. With the fight between the two, especially the addition of the saber-toothed tiger Victor, Stryker, who was sitting behind the computer screen, gradually felt that something was wrong. When Wade's laser-emitting head fell from his neck, Stryker knew the danger this time. If he had known about the death, Eureka would not have sent out. He opened the box at his feet, took out a special revolver from it, and filled it with Edmund bullets one by one. The female deputy came in and looked at Stryker, who was ready. "Even with Edmund bullets, you can't kill him." Stryker smiled coldly. "Just make him lose his memory." When he came to the door and looked at the deputy, who was a little worried, he pointed in a direction and said, "Look at the test subject no. 118. The female deputy nodded and watched Stryker leave. Her rosy lips were slightly curved. She walked into the office and picked up the receiver. She dialed a series of numbers until a deep and slightly magnetic voice came from the other end of the phone. "Who is that?" "Master, Ika." The female deputy, Ika, responded respectfully. "Master, the young master's body has been transformed, and he is extremely powerful. Bring my kids back to New York." Follow your orders. After Ika hung up the phone, he tore off the white coat and shirt and trousers he was wearing, revealing the black one-piece bodysuit inside, and walked slowly to the experimental subject storage warehouse. Oh, the young master is really charming. Looking at the strong young man in the special nutrition cabin, Ika pressed the button on the controller on the right side of the nutrition cabin. As the blue-green nutrient solution was emptied, the glass cover slowly disappeared into the ground. Ika wrapped a blanket around Joaquin, who was leaning on the shelf, and hazy blue smoke appeared out of thin air, covering the two of them. After the blue smoke cleared, the place was already empty. Shoo! The sudden appearance of two figures caused the two soldiers sitting in the duty room to hold up the guns in their hands, and Ika's ruddy lips parted slightly. Long live Hydra. Hi, long live Hydra. The two soldiers nodded and put down their weapons. One of them took 2 steps forward. The submarine is at the southwest pier. Ika glanced at the two of them, and the video in the experimental subjects warehouse. Yes, shoo, shoo. After teleporting twice in a row, I came to a warehouse, and after connecting with the guards, I carried Joaquin into the submarine and drove towards the destination. Sigh. Joaquin, who had been sleeping soundly, suddenly sat up, holding his head in his hands and taking a deep breath, and the muscles of his whole body trembled. Joaquin, who had been covered in sweat for a long time, slowly put down his hands covering his head, and his pale lips quickly returned to rosy. Hee, mutants, Stryker, Captain America. He stepped on the fluffy carpet with bare feet, and as he got up, Simmons, who had been suppressed, quickly returned to the original level, and Joaquin, who came to the window, looked at the green scenery outside the window and the guards patrolling with Doberman pinchers, with a satisfied smile on his lips. Aha, I was hiding in the past life, so it's not bad to enjoy it in this life. After getting into the bathroom, looking at himself in the mirror, he couldn't help nodding and grinning. You're so handsome. A head of black and thick long hair, a handsome face with sharp edges and corners, sharp eyebrows and staring nose, paired with slightly pursed lips. The same is true for Principal Gu and Yanzu, with wide shoulders, narrow waist, long legs, pectoral and abdominal muscles, mermaid lines, and his right hand. After washing, I opened the door, and the 2 young maids outside the door just stood there, staring at each other, and one of the maids blushed a little. Young master, Mrs. Madam and eldest young master are already downstairs. Well, take me there. Following one of the little maids, she went downstairs to the dining room. There were 3 figures sitting on the long dining table, and there were 7 or 8 people standing behind them. The middle-aged woman who was talking, dropped the chopsticks on the dining table with a crash, covered her mouth, got up and ran towards Joaquin. My child, my child. Joaquin let the woman hug his waist, raised his hands in midair and felt a little at a loss. The middle-aged man and the young man on the side also walked over. Looking at their familiar and unfamiliar faces, he opened his mouth but didn't know how to speak. My child, I am mother, you cling to me every day when I was young. Ma Yusho raised her face full of tears, and reached out to caress his face. It can be regarded as saving you. The calm middle-aged man at the side looked at Joaquin with relief, and there was a lingering surprise in the depths of his dark eyes, because Ika couldn't guarantee that the improved brain fluid of Stryker's son could 100% revive Joaquin, but he won the bet. Yu looked at his younger brother whom he hadn't seen for a few years, and reached out to pat him on the shoulder. It's good to come back. My parents have been crazy about you these past few years, and those useless foibles are using our tax money, but they are useless at all. Looking at the pensive Joaquin, he pointed to his face. Yu, your elder brother, the elder brother who took you to visit the Captain America Memorial when you were young. You won't even forget me, right? Half a year has passed since Joaquin woke up, and the time has come to Christmas in 1979. After the family had a warm dinner, Ma Yusho went back to the study to deal with the business documents at home, while the father and son entered the basement of the home. Huawei casually took the thick folder and handed it to Joaquin. This is the information about our family's influence in New York. From now on, you will take over this aspect. My elder brother and your mother are ordinary people. Since you are awakened, it may be better to leave these businesses to you. Joaquin took the folder and flipped through it casually. Is there a mutant in here? Huawei lit his cigar and took a puff. They are all Delta-level mutants. Over the years, ordinary people have treated mutants very coldly. We took advantage of this loophole to recruit a group of mutants. There are not many mutants, only more than 20, and they are scattered in small gangs to act as leaders. Joaquin threw the folder on the coffee table and looked at Yu, who was smiling beside him. Isn't it more dangerous for Big Brother to join Hydra? I'm not like you. Yu waved his hands and smiled. Our Hydra branch originally belonged to Whitehall, but this old man has been arrested by the Homeland Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics Support Bureau, and now my father is in charge of the branch. As long as our Wa family manages well, these good players will be named Wa in the future. He took out a cigar and sniffed it under his nose, with a smile on his face. There is a high-level person in the Strategic Homeland Defense Attack and Logistics Support Bureau who is closely related to us. He will provide us with information to delay the time. When we fully control this branch, wouldn't it be smoother to transfer local technology to our hometown? Looking at Joajin, whose eyelids were jumping wildly, Huawei and Yu stared at Joajin at the same time. Huawei dusted off the smoke. No matter how beautiful our Wa family is outside, there is a certain identity that cannot be erased. Because we are descendants of China. Following Joaquin's answer, the father and son in the secret room looked at each other and smiled. Warwick, a well-known New York philanthropist, found his youngest son who had been missing for nearly 7 years. Of course, it was worth celebrating. Therefore, on the first night of 79, Fahrenheit Manor held a grand reception. Joaquin, who is 1.9 meters tall, wears a restrained white handmade suit. His long hair is casually tied into a ponytail, and with a smile on his mouth, he has become the new favorite of New York ladies' circle as soon as he appeared on the stage. Ma Yusho pulled Hua Jin to the middle circle of ladies, and wiped Hua Jin's side face. This is my poor little son Hua Jin, I hope the sisters will take good care of them in the future. Wow, what a strong boy. A chubby lady looked Joaquin up and down, glanced back and forth at his chest and dantian, swallowed the saliva she had been holding in her mouth by drinking, and stretched out her right hand with a smile. Joaquin naturally took her hand and lightly pecked her on the back of her hand. Mrs. Martha is extraordinarily beautiful today. Cuckoo. Martha slowly withdrew her hand, covered her mouth and smiled. Small mouth is so sweet. While he was chatting and laughing with these noble ladies, Yu also joined in. After chatting with them for a while, he took Hua Jin to Huawei's place. Martha looked at Hua Jin's back and whispered in Ma Yusho's ear, "You have seen my Katie, do you want to think about it?" As the wife of the mayor of New York, Martha was able to let go of her pride as a white person and take the initiative to talk to her about this matter, mainly because her daughter is a mutant, and she is also a demon type that greatly affects her appearance. Another point worth mentioning is that the 4Cs group owned by Fahrenheit has been rooted in New York since Benjamin Harrison was in office. Their family can be said to have witnessed the historical changes of the lighthouse for nearly a century. At least during the election campaign, Fahrenheit helped her husband a lot, whether it was funds or connections. It can be said that Fahrenheit took at least half of the credit for her husband being able to serve as the mayor of New York at the age of 45. As for the exchange of benefits, it is beyond what I can know. Martha, you know about Katie. Looking at Ma Yusho, who was frowning, the ladies around him quickly started laughing, while Joaquin was pulled into his social circle by Warwick, pointing to the middle-aged man with a cigar next to him. Ha ha, this is the savior of our New York City, you have to show due respect to Mayor Matthew. Ha ha, Mr. Wa was joking, let's congratulate you on getting back the young master. Matthew and a few politicians in suits and leather shoes around him raised their glasses with a smile and took a sip. Warwick patted Joaquin's arm and looked at Matthew and the people around him. From now on, the Universal Group will donate $1,000 million to the City Hall every year, and the police department will also donate $1,000 million. The same goes for other departments. My son disappeared once, and I don't want to taste it again. After the politicians heard the numbers, they all smiled. Matthew nodded and looked at Joaquin. Mr. Wa said that you were taken to 3 Mile Island by the military. Have you been imprisoned for more than 6 years? Joaquin, who is extremely talented in acting, suddenly shivered, his handsome face turned pale quickly, and his eyes began to be hollow. He seemed to be recalling some painful past. After a long time, he gently nodded his head. Well, that demon is called Stryker. I heard that he is a colonel. He often uses me as an experiment, injecting the blood genes of those mutants into my body, and seems to want to create a large number of mutants. Speaking of this, his eyes flicked intentionally or unintentionally, and Matthew and another middle-aged man glanced at their faces. I saw a lot of mutants there. They were basically teenagers, and often a healthy mutant. The chance of surviving a year there is not much higher than us winning the lottery. During the few years I was imprisoned there, I also made several mutant friends. Some of them came from the lighthouse, and more came from abroad. No matter what their identities, as long as they were determined to be mutants, they would basically be caught there. Quote. The rather heavy topic quickly cooled the originally happy atmosphere. Matthew seemed to have thought of something. His rosy face turned pale, and there was a mutant daughter in his family. If someone knew her identity, would she suddenly disappear one day? When several people were silent, old Tom, the white butler, walked up to Warwick. Master, Mr. Howard, he brought his wife and young master here. Is it? Walway nodded to Matthew and the others, put down his wineglass and took the two sons to the entrance of the hall. Looking at the pink poop, Joaquin raised his mouth slightly. Hee, Iron Man. Xiao Zhengtai was wearing a well-fitting suit, holding Maria's right hand, and looked curiously at Joaquin, this rich boy who had been missing for several years. On the way here, he heard from his father that he was found back half a year ago. But how could a child give up on a child's curiosity just because of a word from their parents? After his parents were surrounded by other people, Xiao Zhengtai came to the tall Joaquin, raised his head and looked at the squatting Joaquin. My father said that you were a mutant, or a very powerful one, so what is your ability? Joaquin raised his hand and stroked his little head. How did your father know? I don't know that. The little guy shrugged his shoulders old-fashionedly and spread his little hands. How can I, a kid, know about the strange thoughts of adults? You haven't told me about your abilities yet. Joaquin smiled slightly, and looked at Xiao Zhengtai with sincere eyes. Then little Tony, would you like to have a mutant friend? The little guy stared at his black eyes, and finally nodded his head, of course. As the future heir of the Ark Group, from his birth to the present, he seems to have no real friends. He has a family to watch him. For the children he socializes with, his parents will always check each other's family background. This makes him very disgusted at such a young age. Joaquin brought the little guy to the courtyard, held his little hand, lowered his head and winked at him. Do you want to eat a hamburger? Or drink some juice? Can you? The little guy grinned, revealing the small black hole that would only appear during the teething period, and smiled quite funny, but asking your chef to make burgers is nothing to brag about, right? Shoo. The little guy looked at the night view of New York under his feet and screamed in fright. Joaquin could only use the magnetic field to stay in midair for a short time, so he looked in one direction and used teleportation again. Wow. After landing, the little Zhengtai blushed with excitement. It's so exciting. Hee, let's go. There is the Golden Arch not far ahead. Let's go to a place with a good view to enjoy after buying burgers. Joaquin led the young lady with a smile and walked into the Golden Arches. While he was ordering, Joaquin glanced around. Except for the two waiters who were cleaning, only the waiter behind the counter was left. At this time, the waiter brother was busy ordering food, but his eyes glanced back and forth on a busy waiter from time to time, and he couldn't hide his deep greed and possessiveness. Joaquin followed his line of sight and finally settled on the waiter near the door. I have to say that just looking at the back is really attractive, especially the B-waist that is tightly grasped, which sets off the slightly exaggerated buttocks. That big sister's figure is really on point. Xiaozheng tugged at Joaquin's sleeve, and the voice was not too loud but could be heard clearly by the people around. Joaquin, who was admiring, and the waiter brother looked at each other awkwardly. The waiter brother took Franklin from Joaquin, and was just about to change, but he waved his hand. It's a tip for you, remember to share it equally. While Joaquin and Mrs. Xiaozheng were waiting for their meal, the two waiters cleared up the table and came to the counter. The younger brother gave them some small change and pointed to the side. Joaquin's eyes were focused on the left side. The tall and plump blonde waiter nodded politely to her, and chatted with Xiao Zhengtai. Soon the blonde waiter brought over the packed hamburger and bowed politely to Joaquin. Thank you for your generosity, sir. Joaquin took the bag, and led the anxious little Zhengtai to get up and walk out. You're welcome. After taking 2 steps, he turned his head to look at the waiter, raised his hand and tapped his head with his index finger. It's not a good habit to use telepathy to invade other people's brains. You too. The waitress looked at Joaquin with some embarrassment. The latter thought for a while and went back to the counter, took a pen and paper to write down his contact number, and handed the note to her. If you are free tomorrow morning, just call this number. Maybe in the vast crowd, the meeting of the same kind is also a kind of fate, isn't it? After two figures, one big and one small, pushed the door out, the scene of disappearing instantly made her mouth open, and she clenched the note and the tip tightly in her hand. Maybe this kind of person like herself can help her avenge herself. How about it, little guy? Isn't it interesting to eat hamburgers here? On the Statue of Liberty, Joaquin and Tony Jr. She sat on the sharp corner of the statue's head, dangling their legs, eating a hamburger and sucking happy water. The little guy looked at the brightly lit night scene and ate the hamburger with big mouthfuls, feeling an indescribable joy in his heart. Jin, I'm committed to your friend. After eating the hamburger, he patted Joaquin's thigh in an old-fashioned way, and the latter patted his head with a smile. Don't talk like an adult, you know. You are only 9 years old. Putting his hands on his thighs, Xiaojun looked up at the stars in the sky. Jin, what is your future dream? After thinking for a while, Joaquin smiled. I hope to make my motherland more and more prosperous, so as to contribute my own strength, so that she will never be bullied by other countries at will again. It's not right. The little guy pointed to the statue at his feet. Our lighthouse has always been very strong, and no other country dares to bully us. I'm talking about the motherland on the other side of the ocean, where people have the same skin color as me. Joaquin sighed with emotion. She is slowly rising now, and one day she will stand on top of the world again. Of course, she needs to develop herself as much as possible before that. What about you? Facing Joaquin's question, the little guy thought for a while, and finally shrugged helplessly. I don't have any dreams anymore. I am not short of money, so I can spend whatever I want. If I'm really bored, maybe I will study some weapons or something else. Can you sell me a copy of the technology you have researched by then? Seeing the little guy thinking, Joaquin patted him on the back. Just take me for a joke, little guy. He got up and patted the dust on his pants. We should go back, maybe your parents are already worried about you. Okay. When the two returned to the manor, the banquet had already come to an end. They accompanied their father and elder brother to see off the guests, and when they finally waved goodbye to the Howard family, little Tony poked his head out of the car window and looked at Joaquin seriously. Hey, Jin, I will seriously consider your suggestion. After sending off the guests, the father and son went to the basement to take a seat. This time, Ika came in together. This undercover agent who was originally assigned to Stryker is now Huayu's secretary and personal bodyguard, a beta-level mutant who can teleport. After she handed the folder to Huayu, she twisted her waist and left the basement. Joaquin looked at Ika who was leaving, and winked at Huayu. Maybe after tomorrow I won't be so envious of you. Maybe. Huayu smiled and opened the folder. Hank Pym is currently a senior technical advisor of the Land Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics Support Bureau. It is currently impossible for you to pull him out. The Pym particles he researched have very broad prospects. At least Howard will not let him leave easily. Joaquin was silent for a long time before he asked, what about Osborn? At present, there seems to be a problem with Osborn's capital chain. Is there any chance for us to raise funds to obtain their shares? It is impossible for old Osborn to sell the shares to us Fahrenheit. This time it was Huawei who answered him, and he dusted off the soot. Osborn belongs to a family business, and it is absolutely impossible for other families to get involved. Even if we buy some odd shares through the stock market and become minority shareholders, we have no right to speak at the top and can only provide them with funds for nothing, so don't think about it. But what? Huayu flipped through the folder in his hand. Maybe we can recruit biological researchers from their group with high salaries and support some of their research, such as genetic talents. He closed the folder, looked at his father Warwick, and then at the thoughtful Joaquin. If all members of our family can become mutants, preferably self-healing mutants, then our lifespan will be greatly increased. We, Washi, have wealth that rivals the world, but we don't have the matching lifespan to enjoy it. This is impossible. When mentioning the word longevity, the first thing that comes to Joaquin's mind is the super soldier potion, followed by the Howard couple who will be killed by Bucky in 10 years' time. Maybe the big shit after losing his parents is the most beneficial for him. Hua Jin nodded and took the cigarette from Huayu and lit it. Then let's start preparing for our own biological group. This group will be independent and under my control in the future, but the funds will still be input from the family. You have to meet the mutants in New York as soon as possible, and give them some benefits by the way. Anyway, with these black gloves, it's very convenient to do some chores. Joaquin nodded, got up and left the basement, while Wei looked at the majestic back of his youngest son, smiled and turned to look at Hua Yu. How is the discussion at the Hanmer group? Hua Yu shook his head. It's not ideal. They are only willing to sell finished weapons, and they are some old guys who are about to become obsolete. This may be an advanced technology for the other side of the ocean, but we all know what is going on. The most important point is that the Homeland Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics Support Bureau. They have certain undercover agents in Hanmer, and large transactions will definitely be discovered. Unless, Warwick hummed knowingly, I will contact Pierce. Then the father and son talked about some business matters, and then left the basement. On the empty courtyard lawn, there were more than a dozen solid steel balls with a diameter of about 1 meter, which were controlled by Joaquin, who was holding his right hand, to roll back and forth. It was very difficult for him to keep the magnetic field in the air. At present, the only abilities that Joaquin can use are self-healing, Cyclops, teleportation, and magnetic field control. Self-healing is at the Alpha level, which is the Omega Reserve level. It is extremely difficult to die naturally or be killed, let alone his Edmund skeleton. As far as the metals known on the planet are concerned, there is no metal weapon that can cut off his Edmund skeleton. Delta-level teleportation is indeed a lot more convenient for him, at least it is very convenient for short-distance running, and the magnetic field control is only available at Delta level, which belongs to the rookie among rookies. Fortunately, this ability can be realized through continuous training so as to improve the level. He didn't know how to judge the power of Cyclops, so he regarded it as a dispensable ability. Anyway, there would not be too many opportunities for him to take action, and training a group of thugs was his main purpose. Those other messy genes are hidden by the body's protection mechanism, and unless it is an awakening between life and death, they will always be lurking in the body. He struggled to control those big steel balls to roll back and forth. As time passed, his forehead was covered with bead-sized beads of sweat. At this moment, the old butler Tom came over. Second young master, I have your phone number. It sounds like a young girl. Use teleportation to come to the living room, pick up the receiver, hello. Emma, who was leaning against the public phone booth, replied nervously after hearing this familiar voice, it's me. I know it's you, my kind. Emma heard the other party's smile, and blinked her big eyes. Can you come to the wonderful coffee shop on XX Street? I will wait for you there. Okay. After hanging up the phone, Emma walked out of the public phone booth, walked across the road into the coffee shop, ordered a glass of lemonade for herself, and then quietly sat in the corner and waited. Diagonally opposite her, there were 3 middle-aged men in suits and leather shoes. They whispered about the mutants and the uneasiness they brought to their lives. The more they said that, the more uncomfortable it was for Emma, who was sitting in the corner. She was once a member of them, but now she became a member of the freak fools they called. They narrated the mutants' inadequacy and embarrassment everywhere between the lines, but they couldn't hide the sourness of envy in their voices, which made Emma even more disgusted with these 3 people, especially her telepathy, which told Emma how much they longed to be one of the freaks. Emma, who couldn't take it anymore, used her telepathy to hint them and let them leave the coffee shop. The noise in her ears finally disappeared. She took a breath and took out the wallet from her coat pocket. There was a photo of her and her sister in it. She touched her sister's cheek in the photo with her fingers, and her eye sockets gradually became moist. Why are you hiding here and secretly wiping your tears? Joaquin, who was wearing casual attire, sat across from her with a smile on his face, and handed over a clean white handkerchief. Wipe it off, she's a beautiful girl, she likes to cry, it's okay. Emma took the handkerchief and wiped her tears. She was about to put it on her nose to wipe her snot when she realized that the handkerchief belonged to someone else. When she looked up, she saw Joaquin shaking his head with a smile, it's okay. While Emma was arranging her appearance, Joaquin beckoned to the waiter and handed over a Franklin. A cup of mocha, how about you? Same. Then 2 cups, thank you. Joaquin looked at Emma, who was arranging her hair, and couldn't help taking a closer look. Under the long blonde hair, there was a tender face with a little baby fat, three-dimensional but delicate features, a pair of big blue eyes with red eye sockets, a smiling lip under the high bridge of the nose, and loose clothes that couldn't hide the stalwart chest. The summary Joaquin gave her was, "The perfect gun mount. Sir, your coffee." When the two were silent, the waiter walked up to them with coffee, and when the waiter was about to hand over the change, he waved his hand, "No need. Thank you for your generosity and have a great day with this lady." Joaquin stirred the coffee with a small spoon. "Is your ability telepathy right? How far can it spread? Now I can only give some spiritual hints to ordinary people within 10 meters around me. If the other party is stubborn, my spiritual hints will have no effect at all, and I will expose myself." "Delta class," Joaquin murmured, took a sip of coffee and looked at Emma, who was silent across the way. "Seeing that you are not very old, you should still be a student, right?" Emma nodded and shook her head, then stared at Joaquin's black eyes. "Mr. Joaquin, how many mutants have you come into contact with?" "Okay." Joaquin froze for a moment, then smiled. "In addition, you are the second. What do you think?" Emma was discouraged when she heard this, and she lowered her head and said nothing, but Joaquin's next words rekindled her hope. "But I will start a biological research company next time, and I will recruit some mutant employees at that time. Seeing that you worked in a fast food restaurant last night, you haven't found a suitable job yet, have you?" "I haven't even finished junior high school. Do you have a job for me?" Looking at Emma, who was surprised and puzzled, Joaquin smiled. "Just be my secretary and help me with some chores. I will help you apply for a place in the School of Business Administration. You can go to school to learn relevant knowledge when you have nothing to do. By the way, I don't know your name yet." "Emma, my name is Emma Frost." Joaquin, who just took a sip of coffee, was almost sprayed out. "Is this little girl the famous White Queen?" After putting down the coffee cup, Lou asked strangely, "How old are you this year?" 19 is old. The family found out that you were a mutant and kicked you out." Emma shook her head. "I'm Canadian. 5 years ago, a group of people suddenly broke into my house, knocked my parents out, and tied me to a strange place. Because I was too scared at the time, I awakened my mutant ability. After being discovered by the guards, they moved me to another place, where I saw a lot of mutants, and they were about the same age as me." After listening to Emma's narration, Joaquin was already stupefied. He turned into a diamond and then awakened his telepathy. "This is the right queen of the White Queen." However, according to the information brought back by her father, the White Queen was in a military guard base. After being rescued by Magneto, King Eric and others from the Brotherhood, there has been no news so far. What is going on here? According to the nature of the Marvel Universe, superheroes with the same ability are almost not born with the same superpowers, that is, one carrot and one pit. Unless the original carrot is pulled out, a new carrot will be made into the pit. Is the original White Queen dead? Or is it that the Marvel plane where he is located has deviated from the original trajectory? Thinking of this, he asked, "Then do you know the mutant White Queen?" "You recognize." Emma became interested. "Is my telepathic ability guided by Teacher Emma?" Teacher Emma. Yes. As soon as she talked about this topic, she immediately regained her spirits. "After we were rescued by Professor Charles, we were taken to his castle, where I met Teacher Emma, who is also a big blonde beauty like me." Messed up, all messed up. In one afternoon, Joaquin almost got a general idea of Emma's past. The current Professor Charles, who just changed his job as the principal, is cultivating the first batch of disciples among the rescued children. The famous one is Cyclops, and with the addition of the White Queen, their strength is definitely the strongest among the mutants, not to mention Storm, Phoenix, Iceman, Wolverine, Colossus and others who joined later. Among the mutants, there are only a few powerful fighters with names and surnames, and the rest are basically on Magneto's side. There are not too many that I can collect. It seems that only by lighting up the technology tree can we mass-produce cannon fodder and thugs. He, Stryker, was able to manufacture 11 weapons in the late 70s, so if he stayed for 2.30 years, he couldn't believe that he couldn't manufacture more powerful weapon fighters. Thinking of Stryker, he thought of that guy's current family background, the dead girl Yuriko Koyama, who can be called a female version of Wolverine, and also has a complete adamantium alloy skeleton and sharp claws in her body, which is completely worthy of Wolverine. More is the existing X gene, and those frozen experimental subjects, including his former good friend Jason. Seeing Joaquin propping his head on his right hand and looking out the window in thought, Emma sat opposite and watched quietly, looking at this almost perfect man in front of her, handsome, rich and tall. Following him is definitely better than wandering by herself. Whether she can avenge her sister in the future, it seems that following him is more likely than doing it alone. Let's go. Stay at my house today. Do you have anything to take away? Following Joaquin into his luxury car, Emma looked at the interior cautiously. I still have some changes of clothes that I need to bring. No need, just go back with me. Joaquin kicked the accelerator. The engine of the sports car roared like a wild beast, and the car merged into the sea of cars emitting black smoke. Emma thought of a key question. By the way, you haven't told me what your ability is yet. I have the money ability. He blinked at the dumbfounded Emma. Since my ability is not enough to fulfill your wish, why don't you make more money and recruit people to help you complete it? Turn the steering wheel to the right in a circle. I have also suffered the same experience as you, even more miserable than you. You were just drawn a little blood, but I have to endure the torture of being disemboweled and even cast into the whole body by molten iron. Old Tom looked at the girl who got out of the young master's car, his eyes narrowed into a smile, and he bowed slightly. Hello, beautiful lady, I am Tom, the housekeeper at home, you can call me Old Tom. Hello. Emma looked at the clean old clothes on her body, and then looked at the luxurious courtyard in front of her. She opened her mouth and was led by Joaquin and walked into the house. By the way, Old Tom, greet Mary and the others, and prepare new clothes and shoes for Emma. There is no need to prepare the room. She will sleep with me in the future. Okay, sir. Old Tom turned around and left with a smile on his face. Emma's ears were red, and she murmured in a low voice, "Who wants to live with you?" Joaquin smiled. I will have a lot of things to deal with in the future. I want to let me leave things to you with confidence. What kind of relationship do you think we can get along with most reassuringly? Emma didn't say much after hearing this, but let Joaquin hold hands and went to his room. In the evening, when Huawei and the others came back and were sitting at the dining table preparing to have dinner, Mayusha looked at Old Tom suspiciously. Where is Ah Jin? He is the most active when eating. Old Tom smiled brightly. I'm going to call second young master right now. Tisk, why is Tom so mysterious today? Huawei took a sip of tequila, looked at each other with his eldest son, and raised his eyebrows at the same time, especially old Huawei, glanced at Ika who was sitting next to Hua Yu, and waited with a smile on his face. Shoo. Joaquin brought Emma to the dining table, looked at the astonished Ma Yusho, and introduced, this is Emma Frost, my future personal secretary. Hello, uncle and aunt. The old couple nodded with a smile, and looked up and down at the brand new Emma. With the help of the little maids, they gave her a big wave. She was wearing a black slim-fit long dress and black-faced red-soled high-heeled shoes on her feet. Her tall and glamorous appearance was in line with Ma Yusho's aesthetics. Joaquin said that she was his personal secretary, not his girlfriend. This was the most important point. After all, it would take a long time for the two brothers to get married in the future. During the meal, Hua Yu kept scanning Emma's face and upper body with his eyes, and was glared at by Joaquin. He shrugged indifferently and took a sip of his wine. Emma, what is your ability? I don't believe in Joaquin. You brought her home just to recruit a secretary. You are the first one. Emma looked at Joaquin, and put down the knife and fork after seeing him nodding. Although her mouth didn't move, the people at the table heard her voice. This is my ability. Then Hua Yu looked at his hands with a strange expression on his face, because these hands were not in control, bumping left and right with a knife and fork, and Ika raised his brows. Telepathy. After Emma withdrew her ability, her whole body instantly turned into a diamond, and even the big wave became a diamond. A pair of almost transparent eyes glanced at several people, and easily twisted the knife and fork into twists. The old couple continued to eat while smiling. Old Tom handed over a new knife and fork with a wink. He gave Warwick a meaningful look, then stepped back behind him, looking at Emma with satisfaction. Hua Yu continued to eat, and Ika looked at Emma with some envy. She was born with dual abilities. In her knowledge, she seemed to have never heard of many people, but Emma's ability reminded her of a person, that is, the White Queen. Emma's arrival did not bring any changes to their family, but Hua Yu's speed of building the new group was much faster. After all, the earlier the X gene was developed, the more obvious the effect of their income would be. Yo, not meat, your female partner is more serious, ha ha ha. Shish, hee hee hee. In Brooklyn at night, there are black people everywhere. They all have their own territory. Rush between gangs is as normal as going to a fair in China. Well-dressed Joaquin, driving Martha in a sports car, was driving slowly on the chaotic streets. He stretched out his left hand out of the car window, and held a Franklin between his index and middle fingers. Whoever told me how to get to the blue bar, this Franklin is his. I. A skinny black guy stepped forward to take the knife, and pointed at the street ahead happily. Turn left at the second intersection, and you will be there about 100 meters ahead. It is the site of the 57 Feet Gang. But if you want to have fun, sir, you'd better go to other areas. After all, you should know this. Joaquin ignored him, waved his hand and kicked the accelerator, and drove straight to the bar that the guy mentioned. After parking the car, the two looked around. There were only 2 or 3 dilapidated old-fashioned cars around. The unpleasant smell made Emma hold her nose. But seeing Joaquin enter the bar, she couldn't stay where she was, and followed with a huge briefcase in her left hand. A few big black men at the door looked at Emma, who was dressed in bright clothes, and couldn't help grinning with her big thick lips. They usually don't see such a decent white girl once or twice. Emma caught up with Joaquin in front. The big truck is in the office on the 3rd floor. Joaquin nodded, with his left arm around Emma, his right hand brushing aside the drinkers who were twirling wildly on the dance floor, and went straight upstairs. At the corner to the 3rd floor, 2 big men blocked his way. Upstairs is not an event venue, sir, you can't go up there. It is rare to see such a polite black man, he smiled. You go to big truck, Worthy, just say the boss is here. One of the black men nodded and entered the passage at the corner. Soon 3 or 4 strong men came over quickly. The leader was actually a young white man with a dry body and no deterrent force at all. Big truck, Worthy looked Joaquin up and down, and Emma beside him frowned. You are Kent Transport Company. Listening to the female voice coming from next to his ears, and looking at the smiling Joaquin, he pulled away the subordinates blocking the 2 of them, and respectfully raised his right hand. Boss, please. Several subordinates wanted to follow, but were stopped by Worthy with a wave of his hand. Finally, Worthy, who entered the room, closed the door and rubbed his hands with a smile. Boss. Joaquin looked around the office, and finally came to the boss chair and sat down with his feet on the table. Your ability is kinetic energy. Yes, how about the power? Worthy smiled. After accumulating power, it can overturn a large truck running at full speed. Bring the ledger. Yes. Looking at the above income and expenditure, especially the expenditure, it was normal in the first half of last year, but in the second half of the year, especially after September, 9% of the monthly income was not handed over to the leather bag company, but circled and written, protection fee. You are the boss of the 57 Feet Gang, and you still have to pay protection fees to other gangs. Facing Joaquin's questioning, Worthy looked embarrassed. It's not my fault, boss. I planned to talk to the contact person, but he called in advance, saying that in the future, we small gangs will be taken over by others. Let's wait for the new boss to come and talk about it, and then. Looking at Worthy, who shrugged, Joaquin sneered and shook his head. Tell me, who did you give it to? Wilson Grant Fisk, a gang leader who just rose last year. This kid is ruthless. Now, due to lack of manpower, he didn't eat as small gangs. He just took our profits every month. Joaquin thought for a long time but couldn't figure out who this person was, so he asked, does he have a nickname? Worthy nodded. Originally there was no such thing as Jin Bian in other areas recently, but he himself didn't seem to object. Now Joaquin knew who it was, the famous New York underworld king Jin Bing, but from the current point of view, he seemed to have just started, and it was more in line with his own recruiting interests. Where is his gang stationed? The Golden Bar on XX Street in Manhattan. ... Joaquin blinked and blinked. He's a gangster in Manhattan alone, and he came to your Brooklyn area to collect protection money. Worthy grinned bitterly. If you don't give it, you can't do it. We have already killed more than a dozen small bosses in our area. There is a gang leader who is also a gamma-level mutant, and he has broken his whole body. Who do you think dares to object? Emma. The latter opened the suitcase, took out a stack of beautiful knives and threw them on the table. Joaquin got up and tidied his clothes. The money is shared with the other bosses in this area who belong to us. As for the income from the bar, forget it. You can share it with the younger brother below. By the way, keep an eye out for me to see if there are any mutants who have recently awakened. He paused for a moment and couldn't care less about the poor income. If this area wanted to make money, they had to go to D. They were all locals anyway, so no matter how many deaths they had, it was none of his business. There is no need for him to check the small gangs in other areas. After Jin Bin is settled, there will naturally be someone who can take charge of these unspeakable matters. So he kicked the accelerator and drove directly to the bar where Jin Bin was located in Manhattan. The white elites in New York and many wealthy children who could come here to consume were naturally much more than the income of a night in a broken bar in Brooklyn. Through telepathy, Emma quickly identified Jin Bing's location, controlled a thug, and led the two to the office door above the bar. Several thugs with their stuff in their arms were about to step forward to stop them, but Emma gave a hint and stood there without moving. Joaquin smiled and unscrewed the handle and led Emma into the office. The two people sitting on the sofa turned their heads and looked over, and then the strong man sitting inside frowned. "Who are you?" He was wearing a specially made oversized suit, which looked like tights on him. His neck was almost thicker than Emma's plump thighs. His appearance was a bit rough, and his eyes couldn't hide the tyranny. Emma's voice was the first to ring out in the quiet office. "Director Mike, is it not good for you to come here this late at night? If the media finds out that you, a messenger of justice, have colluded with gang leaders, will you still be in a safe position?" You. Although the middle-aged man stammered a bit, his right hand was groping for the back of his waist. Joaquin raised his right hand and hooked his fingers, and the pistol at his waist flew into Joaquin's hand. He played with the gun in his hand. Looking at the surprised two people, he pulled the trigger with his right hand against his left palm. Bang! The bullet did not penetrate his palm, but stayed in the palm of his left palm. With a wave of his left hand, the bullet shot into the wall above their heads. "Do. Guru." Joaquin stepped forward and patted the middle-aged man on the shoulder. "This Chief Mike, go out first. I have something to talk to Wilson. It seems a bit inconvenient for you to be here." The middle-aged man took the gun from Joaquin, got up and left the office. After Emma closed the door, she went to the wine cabinet and took another bottle of whiskey and 2 wine glasses. Then she returned to sit next to Joaquin and looked at Wilson with his fists clenched. His right hand turned into an extremely hard diamond in his widening eyes, and his sharp fingertips spun around the mouth of the bottle. Squeak. Boom. He opened the neck of the bottle and poured the wine, handed a glass to Joaquin, and took a sip from the glass himself. A pair of big blue eyes scanned Wilson's body back and forth, and Joaquin snapped his fingers. "Open the box." Click. Caw. The open box was full of stacks of Franklins. Joaquin touched these beautiful knives. "There are more than 80 here, which were originally rewarded to my ineffective subordinates, but when I went to Brooklyn to check the accounts just now, Worthy told me, did you go to collect protection money from him?" "Yes, sir." Wilson didn't quibble. He knew that there were telepaths on the side, and he couldn't tolerate him telling lies. Joaquin smiled with satisfaction. "How much money do you make a month now?" Without waiting for Wilson to speak, he continued to ask. "I mean, after deducting the expenses you gave to your subordinates, the bribes you gave Mike, and the rent and drinks of your place, how much can you earn after deducting all of these?" After pondering for a long time, Wilson looked at the piles of beautiful knives. "About 30,000, sir. Just for the dollars, you need to fight to the death, and you have to greet those useless JCs with a smile on your face, and the enemies are everywhere. Is it worth it?" Shoo. Joaquin, who was originally sitting opposite Wilson, sat next to him in an instant, making Wilson's hairs stand on end. Joaquin looked at the hairs on his neck, and the corner of his mouth slightly curled up. "Follow me, I can give you everything you want. Power, money, beauties, even princesses from countries in the European Union. I can get you here. I only have one request." His mouth moved to Wilson's ear. "Allegiance to me." After he finished speaking, he gave way to the side, and the pen and folder that were originally on the desk flew to the coffee table. He wrote down a series of numbers. "Write down the number, and give me an answer within 3 days. If you don't want to, these dollars will be sent to the New York General Department. Let's say it is a donation from the 4Cs group to the police station." Don't think about swallowing my dollars. Joaquin and Emma left, and Wilson, who was like a mountain of meat, was left alone in the office, looking at the beautiful knife in the box in silence, the scene of his father's tragic death when he was young, the mother's crying in helplessness, and the helpless self was so unwilling. Wow. He got up abruptly, opened the door and chased after him. Finally, in the parking lot, he caught up with the two people who were about to get into the car. He walked in front of Joaquin with steady steps, looked at Joaquin, who was half a head shorter than himself, and lowered his head. I am willing to serve you, Mr. Wa. Then use the money in your office to recruit good players. Tomorrow night, more than 20 mutants will come to your bar. From now on, they and the small gangs behind them will all be merged under your command. Integrate New York's underground forces as soon as possible. Don't care about the casualties of those scumbags. I will greet you at the police station. Watching the sports car roaring away, Wilson clenched his fists and turned back to the bar. When the night fell again, a group of strong men slowly gathered outside the Golden Bar, and their exaggerated figures could not be covered by fleece leather jackets. These strong men all had one characteristic in common, that is, there was a layer of calluses on the tiger's mouth. Pickup trucks also drove into the underground parking lot of the bar. The strong men who had surrounded the door followed the pickup trucks into the underground parking lot. Worthy jumped off a big pickup truck, and together with other mutants, came to Wilson. Big truck, Worthy, maybe Boss Wilson still has some impressions. Wilson smiled and shook hands with him. Of course I have an impression. Last year, your shoulder made my chest tight for a few minutes. I think it's still very good. Hee. Worthy smiled awkwardly, and introduced his companions. Among these mutants, there were those who could spit out extremely corrosive saliva, those with half-baked regenerative abilities, those with extremely fast abilities, and even a few beast types. In the eyes of ordinary people, these mutants may be very powerful, but in Wilson's view, they are just some miscellaneous fish. The elite members of these gangs, that is, the strong men who came to the parking garage with the pickup trucks, brought mouthfuls of large black canvas bags from the trunks of the pickup trucks. After unzipping the zipper, it was Wilson who couldn't help but take a deep breath. Gift crab. Worthy rubbed his nose with his index finger and lit a cigarette for himself. The boss asked us to bring these over. He said that you should need these big guys to integrate New York, boss. There are 2 bags of grenades and 6 RPGs in that guy's car. There are also 30 rounds of ammunition, which is enough for us to show off, he. While he was speaking, several strong men came to stand beside him carrying rocket launchers. Wilson took a machine gun from Worthy and pulled the bolt. What are you waiting for? Let's take action, starting from Manhattan today. Yo-hoo, ha. Yeah, let them see how powerful we are. Quote. While Wilson was on the move, Joaquin and Emma were also dressed in formal attire, and suddenly appeared at the door of Director JC's house. He rang the doorbell, and a middle-aged woman opened the door for them not long after. Excuse me, who are you? Mrs. Halls, my mother introduced you to me at a party at my house not long ago. You are Mr. Joaquin. The two warmly welcomed the two into the room. When they came to the living room, Director Meng was watching the FNL game. Seeing the smiling Joaquin, he stood up and stretched out his right hand in a daze. Ha, Jin, why do you want to come to my house as a guest? I have something to discuss with you. Seeing Joaquin's eyes looking towards the kitchen, Raymond led the two into the study knowingly. Emma put the suitcase he was carrying on his desk, opened it and turned around. Joaquin lit a cigarette for him. Uncle Raymond has been in the director's seat for a while, right? Raymond ignored him, because he was fascinated by the scenery in front of him. There were not many things in the box, just a bearer passbook, 2 keys, and some gems and jewelry. Yeah, almost 2 years. When he came back to his senses, he pressed the lid and puffed out the smoke ring. If you have anything to say, just say it. Are you still so polite with Uncle Meng? Ha. Joaquin smiled. Do you think it is better to have a New York full of gangs, or a New York after the gangs are unified? Raymond smoked in silence, staring at Joaquin for a long time. Don't make too much noise, you know those reporters. Ha. Don't worry, Uncle Raymond, for a month at most, the survival rate of the police officers under your patrol will at least double. When the time comes to face the city with the lowest crime rate in the United States, those reporters will only praise you for your good governance, right? He dusted off the cigarette ash. There are 300 million deposits in this passbook, a sea view villa in Venice, and a newest yacht. Maybe you should take your aunt there for vacation after you are busy with work, shouldn't you? Raymond nodded with a smile. Where are the other division chiefs? Don't worry, Uncle Raymond, your 2 deputies are worth 200 million each, the district chiefs are 150 million each, and the district deputy chiefs are 100 million. They can definitely stop their mouths. When New York settles down, I will donate $1 to the police station to improve the welfare of grassroots JCs. Now there is nothing to say. He just needs to let his subordinates deal with the aftermath. The two smiled tacitly, and then chatted, during which Emma went out to help them bring coffee. In 5 weeks, under Wilson's leadership, they almost plowed through the entire New York, and their staff has rapidly expanded from the original 300 to nearly 5,000. In smaller bars or nightclubs, there are only a few people staying, and most of them are the bosses. They hired professional security, but gave Wilson profits every month in exchange for his asylum. Indeed, as Joaquin said, after the labor pains, the crime rate in New York is only 30% of what it was before. As they consolidate their existing territory, the crime rate will gradually decrease. Unlike Raymond sitting in his office and drinking coffee leisurely, in several cities around New York, the crime rate has increased significantly during this period. Many gangs who have withdrawn from New York have gone to the surrounding cities to grab territory. Their local police stations receive a large number of rescue calls every day, which makes those chiefs hate Raymond half to death. The Ark Group, which belongs exclusively to Joaquin, also set up a sign on an inconspicuous building in Manhattan. Everything is just a simple situation, and the research in this building is only some medicines used to treat human diseases. The real base for researching genes is still in the construction stage, which requires a lot of time, and what Joaquin is most lacking now is time. As everyone knows, this anti-cancer drug has a very obvious effect on ovarian cancer and breast cancer. Since our establishment 4 years ago, Ark Group has been working on their drugs. This paclitaxel is the first prescription drug launched by our group. At the press conference, Emma, who was wearing a moon-white suit, became a film killer. In the photos of many reporters, it seemed that they wanted to keep the figure of this lady. With the advent of paclitaxel, the Ark Group became the focus of the world for the first time. After all, many women die from these 2 types of cancer every year. Although the price of this drug is not cheap, for those who want to live, they can accept no matter how expensive the price is. With the successful conclusion of the press conference, Emma, who became more and more seductive, walked towards the elevator with steady steps, but the chick at the front desk ran over, whispered something in her ear, and pointed in one direction. Emma followed the direction of her fingers and saw a lady who was dressed similarly to her. Emma clenched her right fist and walked over with a long breath. "Teacher." The White Queen looked at her students with a smile, and couldn't help but raise her hand to caress her face. "It's really good to see you living a normal life. Charles misses you children very much, so let me see how you are doing. I want to talk to my boss. He is very interested in Xavier School for Gifted Youth. Can he go with me?" Facing the simple request from the students, the White Queen did not refuse. "Then I will go back first. You know the address of the school." Seeing the figure leaving, Emma shrugged and entered the elevator, and soon came to the office on the top floor that belonged to herself and Joaquin. There was no conflict between the 2 desks, one on the left and one on the right. She picked up the landline and called Joaquin. "Professor Charles wants to see me, and he agrees to let me take you with him." "I'll pick you up." In the office at the top of the Fisk building, Joaquin hung up the phone and put his cigarette butt out in the ashtray. "The bears won't be strong for long, and we can start looking for our spokesperson for them. I don't care about ordinary small characters. What we need is someone who can talk." Wilson, who was standing at the desk, bowed. "I know the boss. By the way, don't push too hard in Mexico. After all, it's not our base camp. There are not a few mutants there. What we need is American knives. If we don't have enough supplies, we can go to Triangle to buy them. Make it clear to the following. Whoever dares to get involved with Washaw will drag the whole family to fill the sea." Accompanied by Wilson, Joaquin entered the elevator. "After you have made arrangements here, go to the base in Boston. Kurt Connors has made some progress on the X gene, and the results are not bad so far. For your current strength, it should be enough to strengthen a lot. Thank you, boss. After watching Joaquin get into the car and leave, Wilson grinned. It was really good to follow Joaquin at the beginning. At least now, he wants money and power, and even the high-ranking director Raymond talks to him politely. Next, as long as he completes the tasks assigned by his boss, he can enjoy the glory and wealth with peace of mind. The car quickly stopped in front of the Ark building. Emma, who was dressed in a moon-white suit, got into the car, hugged Joaquin and gave him a sweet kiss, then looked at the bearded man in the driver's seat, Victor. Okay, I won't watch it. The strong man shrugged his shoulders and kicked the accelerator, and the car quickly merged into the traffic flow. According to the address provided by Emma, he drove towards Xavier College. He has been following Joaquin for a year. When Wilson was expanding to other cities with New York as the center, he met Victor, who was like a homeless man, in a run-down tavern. Since the departure of 3 Mile Island, he has indeed lived a good life. No one ordered him to do this or that, but there were too many boring days, but he began to miss his previous life, so he found Stryker, who had just been released not long ago. Stryker, whose ex-weapon plan was frustrated, was worried that he would not have a test subject. Victor, the saber-toothed tiger, delivered it to his door by himself. How can there be any reason not to accept it? As soon as the pie was drawn to arouse Victor's interest, someone below reported that the escaped Wolverine had been found. In order to capture Wolverine, Victor knew that he was invincible, but he still joined forces with the dead girl Yuriko Koyama to capture Wolverine, who had lost his memory. He was also mercilessly cut off his left arm by Wolverine. No matter how powerful his self-healing ability is, he has not yet reached the point of rebirth of a broken limb. For Victor, who lost an arm, in the eyes of Stryker at this time, he is not even qualified to be a test subject, so he was naturally abandoned by Stryker. The one-armed Victor has completely degenerated. He hangs around various taverns all day long, robbing them when he has no money. As for stealing, he doesn't even bother to do so. As he headed north, he finally met Wilson's men, who came to occupy the territory in a dilapidated tavern. More than a dozen younger brothers were killed, which naturally attracted Wilson's attention. When Victor, the one-armed saber-toothed tiger, met the mighty bear Wilson, the two still fought inseparably. Wilson even dared to assert that if Victor was in his heyday, he must not be his opponent. Rather than saying that neither of them could do anything about it, it might be better to say that Wilson suffered a little loss and chose to recruit Victor and brought him in front of Joaquin. For this saber-toothed tiger, who was much stronger than before cheating, Joaquin took Victor with a smile and went to the secret underground base in Boston. With the help of Connors, using other self-healing X genes, Victor, who had lost his left arm, grew his left arm again, and he became stronger than before, because he now has 2 self-healing abilities. As long as his head is not separated, he can't die. Victor, who is indifferent to everything, thinks it is good to follow Joaquin. He has food, shelter, and women. He needs everything. If he is bored, he can go to other areas to kill to his heart's content. What place is more comfortable than following Joaquin? Squeak. To the boss. Victor opened the car door for Joaquin, and while waiting for him to get out of the car, he also received Emma's eyes. As a man, don't you know that you should open the door for the lady first? What Emma answered was a pair of big white eyes. The 3 of them, mainly Joaquin, walked into this historic super mansion. Some mutant children were playing on the lawn. Chapter 11. Knock knock knock. Please come in. When Joaquin walked into the office, he finally saw Charles, the imaginary Professor X, but the thick brown hair still made him stunned, and then he came to the conclusion, he is not bald yet, and he is not completely naked yet. Ha ha ha, little Emma, long time no see. Professor. Emma excitedly stepped forward to hug Charles, who was sitting in a wheelchair. Thank you for your rescue. Charles patted Emma on the back with a smile, but his wise eyes swept across the faces of Joaquin and Victor. Welcome, Mr. Joaquin. Hello, Professor Charles. Joaquin stepped forward to shake hands with him, and looked at the middle-aged man in awe of all mutants in front of him. Is there any better employment agency for those adult mutants in the school you run? What, in your research base in Boston, do you still lack mutant genes? Charles smiled meaningfully. Our kind is miserable enough. No no no. Joaquin shook his head. The real dark age has not yet come. With the increasing pressure on human beings and the increasing contact with various high-tech, mutants will usher in a real outbreak period in the future. At that time, human beings will do everything possible to drive or eliminate those same kind. You should trust human beings with good hearts. Charles seems to have blind faith in humans. After all, we mutants also evolved from humans. In my hometown, Washaw, there is such a proverb: don't worry about scarcity, but worry about inequality. Joaquin took out the cigarette case and shook it. Charles nodded with a smile. Please go ahead. Throwing one to Victor, he took a sip himself. You should know about the 7 deadly sins, right? That's the worst human nature. They envy their former kind, that is, us. If they can't get it, then others can't get it either. This is what the leaders of human beings really think. Maybe there will be some human beings who are still reluctant to part with us, but they are a minority after all, so I am more inclined to judge by myself. Since you know my base in Boston, you also know the original appearance of this base. I did not persecute any of my compatriots, but provided a lot of funds to let them live. Isn't that good? You were raising them in captivity. Charles sighed. What's the difference between you and raising animals? At least they are living happily. They can get materials that they could not imagine before by doing some work within their ability every day. They like their current life very much. My child, the world is generally very tolerant of us. You have to trust them. Trust them. Joaquin's face became grim. When I was less than 14 years old, I was taken away by them and forced to undergo 6 years of experimental transformation. More mutant brothers and sisters, their bodies were made into specimens after being mutilated, and they are used for reference by those perverted humans all the year round. How do you make me trust them? Who? Bang. Professor, are you okay? More than a dozen teenage mutants barged in, surrounded the three of Joaquin. Victor let out a grin with a cigarette in his mouth. His claw nails began to stretch, 2 canine teeth protruded from his lips, and Emma also entered the diamond form. Emma, a fleshy girl with a round face, murmured hesitantly. Emma turned her head to look and smiled. Chin, long time no see, you are still as fat as ever. You are this. Emma shrugged. It's just a disagreement. Charles sighed. After Raven's incident, at least the relationship between humans and us is still very harmonious now, isn't it? Feel sorry. Joaquin sneered. When that incident happened, I was undergoing a new experiment. Do you know the pain of casting bones with ultra-high temperature molten iron? I have tasted it. Even if that happened, it still hasn't changed the fate of me and some of my kind, am I right? Scott, wearing special glasses, looked at Joaquin in astonishment. Who are you? Aha, Joaquin smiled. Have you forgotten? Back then, you were tied to a cold test bench like a lamb, and let those fools take away your retinal tissue, and let them draw your blood once a week. During the most helpless period, you begged them to let you go, right? The result? He came to the silent Scott and patted him on the shoulder. It's only been a few years, have you forgotten the despair at the beginning? Scott shook his head. No, I haven't forgotten that those fools were punished as they should be. Sanctions. Ha ha ha. Joaquin seemed to have heard some joke. He was out of breath from laughing, and touched the tears from laughing for a long time. Victor, you have the most say in this regard, right? Of course, boss. Victor looked around and smiled disdainfully. The reason why the mastermind, Colonel Stryker, was sanctioned was not because he slaughtered hundreds of mutants, but because he stabbed a general to death, which led to him being detained by a military court. Speaking of this, he shrugged. However, his project is so attractive that the military is reluctant to deal with this fool. However, he has been kept and is still working on the previous project. My cute little Jimmy, Wolverine Logan, is still being imprisoned by him in a research base. Oh, my poor little Logan. Looking at Victor, who is so contrived, Joaquin smiled. The reason why you can't notice it now is that firstly, the number of mutants has increased a lot more than before, and secondly, Stryker has completed the accumulation of primitive genes through previous hunting. Finally, he is now mainly working on how to effectively control the amnesiac beast, and use his body as a model to manufacture 11 weapons in large quantities. Glancing at the silent Professor Charles, he straightened his collar. So, Professor, I still insist on my own opinion. Instead of handing over the fate to dirty human beings, it's better to hold it in my own hands, isn't it? Pushing away the blue-haired beast, he walked out first, followed by Victor. Only Emma and the fat chin hugged. You can come to the Ark Group to play with me when you have time. Chin looked at her best friend who was gone, then turned to look at the silent Charles. Professor. It's okay, you all go away. Charles steered the wheelchair back to his desk, and when Joaquin came to the door, he met an unexpected person, Emma Frost, the White Queen. Treat little Emma well. Is it your daughter? Facing Joaquin's whispered question, the White Queen neither denied nor affirmed, but just smiled lightly. Maybe you should go to Poland to meet the legend of the mutants. After all, your level of control over the magnetic field is too low. I will. Glancing at Joaquin who was getting into the car, she pulled the little Emma who was coming, and the two walked slowly on the lawn. According to the information I got here, your sister Kira died when she was shot in the vitals by random gunshots by the guards when she was saving you. It's all due to Stryker, isn't it? Teacher. Seeing the hatred in little Emma's eyes, the White Queen sighed. You can't touch him now. After all, the military is not as simple as you think on the surface. Thank you, teacher, for reminding me. Emma reached out and touched a child's head. Just kill him within his lifetime. I'm not in a hurry, teacher. After all, Jin and I are still very weak now, aren't we? The White Queen looked at the little Emma who was similar to her but superior, and the doting in the depths of her eyes disappeared in a flash. As your teacher, maybe I should teach you other applications of psychic abilities, such as deeper control. The two walked slowly on the lawn, while Joaquin and Victor chatted boredly in the car, listening to this very long-lived tiger recounting his past, interjecting a few words from time to time. The two were not like superiors and subordinates but more like friends. How are you feeling, Wilson? Connors, who was outside the isolation room, looked at Wilson, whose muscles were twitching all over the room, through the thick modified glass. The latter did not speak, but knelt on the ground and clenched his fists, enduring the pain caused by the genetic modification. Ah, ow, who? The X gene of the saber-toothed tiger was crazily eroding the original genes in Wilson's body. The gene chain was torn apart by these violent invaders and doves occupied the magpie's nest, forming a new gene chain. As a result, golden hair grew wildly on Wilson's body. His originally strong body was melting away. On his shiny bald head, thick blonde hair kept coming out of his hair follicles. Two sharp canine teeth protruded from his lips, and his bones cracked non-stop. Roar, ah! Wilson, who had been awakened for a long time, came to the glass and looked at his current self. His height had not changed. His bloated muscles had shrunk by at least 3 circles, but he was still full of menace. He had dazzling blonde hair, a thick beard, and 2 long canine teeth, which shone a little coldly when he grinned. Click, click, stretching his neck, he punched the special glass. The whole glass was smashed into shards by his huge force, which scared Connors. What are you doing? Do you know how difficult it is to get this glass? Wilson got out from the broken window, took a sharp special scalpel, and stabbed it into his chest without hesitation. He could clearly feel the pain in his heart, and as the scarlet scalpel was pulled out, the pain in his heart slowly disappeared, and the wound on his chest actually began to shrink slowly, and finally disappeared. Aha, this feels really good, Professor Connors. Connors didn't have time to pay attention to him. Zach. Soon a heavily armed man walked in. Professor. Shoot him in the head and chest. Ha, unlike Zach, who was struggling to move forward, Wilson, who had just started to enjoy life, shrank back. He looked at Connors warily. Hey, little Four Eyes, do you believe that I dragged your whole family to fill the sea? Connors pushed down the glasses on the bridge of his nose. Trust me, you won't die. Seeing that Wilson still didn't believe it, Connors grabbed the pistol on Zach's thigh and shot himself in the temple. Bang. Puff. Wilson and Zach stared at Connors, who had committed suicide, with dumbfounded eyes. For a while, he didn't know what to say. Zach, who came back to his senses, twitched in fright. Boss Wilson, you also saw that Professor Connors beat himself to death. It's not my fault. Shut up. Wilson squatted on top of Connor's head, carefully staring at the wound on his temple. The right one was okay, with only a small hole, but the left one was much more terrifying. A large piece of flesh and bones flew off. The large wound was healing, visible to the naked eye, but it was a bit slower than his own. Wilson looked at the time, and in about 7 or 8 minutes, the wound on Connor's head recovered to its original state. Do you trust me now? Connors, who woke up half an hour later, was constantly injecting light blue liquid into his arm. Seeing Wilson looking at the needle he injected, he smiled. This is a special medicinal liquid. After all, the gene I injected belongs to the first-generation version of the fusion type. There are some unavoidable defects. You only injected the self-healing gene, so it has no effect. Thinking of his initial successful transformation, Wilson grinned. Then we can use this gene to produce a large number of undead warriors. Connors couldn't help but roll his eyes when he heard this. You think it's beautiful. First of all, the gene chain in your body is very strong, able to withstand some negative effects of the saber-toothed tiger's gene, and secondly, the saber-toothed tiger's gene is extracted from his bone marrow. Rao is an unusually strong saber-toothed tiger, who also lay on the bed for more than a week, and was weak for 4 months. A total of 4 medicines were extracted, and you used the last one. Next time you want to extract his genes, it will take at least 10 years to restore the X gene concentration in the body. This is because he belongs to the self-healing regeneration category. Quote. Wilson was silent for a moment. Then I am awakened now, can I extract it in my body? Cannot. Connors put down his sleeves. After using the gene awakening, the second extracted gene will have uncontrollable effects, and 99.999% of the injectors will die of gene chain collapse. Before Wilson could speak, Connors raised his gun and shot. Boom, boom. Looking at Wilson, who tilted his head back, Connors patted his head. Forget that you are a capable person. Then he took Wilson out of the research room and walked to the lower level of the base. This research base located in the suburbs of Boston. The upper floors are all research rooms for regular pharmaceuticals, and the underground is for research on new energy, various weapons, mutant genes and even inhuman genes. When I came to the floor where light weapons were studied, I found the general manager here. Hollitz, give me a powerful pistol with a new alloy warhead. Seriously, Wilson, I never want to see you again. Connors held the roof of the car with his left hand, put his right hand on the car window, and looked at the smiling Wilson in the back seat. I don't have a single mutant who can teleport here. You can find a way to catch one. Of course, the more the better, the more people of this type can heal themselves. The more people of this type, the better. I heard that the boss has a big plan, which requires a lot of self-healing mutants. Realizing the benefits brought by the X gene, Wilson is now more and more pleasing to Connors. Hee, don't worry, after my forces continue to expand to the European Union, I will capture a large number of mutants for you, but I will capture the rare mutants. Can you awaken other abilities for me? Of course, Connors nodded. You who take the physical route are far from the ultimate, because there are still many people who can strengthen the physical body, but we have not discovered it. How strong you will be in the end depends entirely on how many types of mutants you can bring me. Then we've settled it. Looking at Dalao who was going away, Connors twitched his mouth. No matter how well you integrate, you are still an ability awakener. Let alone the boss, it is his secretary. If you want to deal with you, you just need to move your fingers. Connors, who returned to the underground research base, came to the area where those Epsilon-level mutants lived. There were hundreds of such mutants living here. They all looked strange and had no abilities. Hey, Natasha, how is life here? A mutant who resembled a western banshee opened its bright yellow beak, and said in a crisp voice, "Thank you for your concern, Professor Connors, this place is simply heaven." Connors looked at Natasha, who looked weird, and felt sorry for her in his heart. If she hadn't awakened, she would have been a very beautiful girl. He patted her arm that turned into wings. Someone will ask you to draw blood later, to see if we can find a way to get rid of the bad genes in your body, so that you can live happily in the sun. Thank you. Reaching out to wipe away the tears from the corners of her eyes. Thank you, boss, he is the one who takes pity on you. Natasha looked at the gentleman in front of her, thought for a while and asked beggingly, can you send someone to find my sister? When those people found us, I thought they were bad people, so I asked my sister to hide. I don't know how she is doing now. Oh, Connors froze for a moment. Your sister is also awakened. Natasha shook her head and nodded again. My younger sister has been different from others since she was born. She is a natural mutant. She has the same appearance as the devil in our local church, and even has a devil-like tail. Where were you found? How old is your sister? Near the Alaska Zoo in Anchorage, where we rented an apartment. Connors nodded. How old is it? 11 years old. I see, I will bring your sister over as soon as possible. After he finished speaking, he turned around and was about to leave, but Natasha stopped him. "Professor, my sister will change into someone else's appearance. If I don't go, you won't be able to find her." "Is it?" Connors couldn't suppress the ecstasy in his heart, and nodded indifferently. "I'll make arrangements here, and I'll take you there." After leaving this living area, he walked quickly to his office, picked up the phone and called Joaquin. "Boss, I have a message about someone who can become someone else at will. I need you to help me arrange a plane." Joaquin, who was discussing with Emma in the office where to go on vacation, heard the news from Connors, and quickly acted. After all, it is too difficult to subdue a mutant who can change the appearance of others, especially a mutant who is born with a devil type. If he is properly trained, he will be the next Mystique. The fate of Natasha and her younger sister Dasha is very miserable. Their father was a nuclear power plant worker in Maoshong. When he was young, he often dealt with waste. Later, he retired from the front line when he became ill. He had a relationship with the nurse who took care of him at that time, and later Natasha came into being. At the beginning, everything was happy and perfect until Natasha's third sister was born, that is, little Dasha. At that time, the neighbor aunt who came to deliver her was frightened, and Natasha, who was helping at the side, was also stimulated. She woke up when she was sleeping that night and became a member of the unfortunate Ypsilon. The continuous blows did not kill the whole family. The aunt next door was also kind-hearted, and she didn't say anything to the outside world. She just said that the child with dystocia had died. She kept it a secret for 4 years, until one day little Dasha naturally awakened her ability transformation. She can perfectly transform into anyone she comes into contact with, regardless of height, shape, appearance and voice, which made her discover the new world, and she often went out like her brother, until one time on a country road, she met her brother after school and some of his classmates, and things could no longer be covered. That night, a group of soldiers in special uniforms took away the frightened little Dasha, and even Natasha who was hiding in the cowshed. The leader of the soldiers said to their parents, "As members of Mao Shang, they should fight and sacrifice for this country. You should know this." On the way to the transfer, the officer told Natasha, "There is a lot of compensation for your parents. A brand new big truck, 10 cows rubles are enough for your parents to live affluently." Natasha used her wings to protect the trembling little Dasha. Under the watchful eyes of the soldiers, the two sisters took a plane for the first time, ate snacks they had never tasted before, and tasted the pain of separation for the first time. Little Dasha's abilities were tailor-made for becoming an agent, so she was taken away by a higher-level department, and the fragile Natasha was placed in a nursing home. Little Dasha had 1 day off every month to get along with Natasha. How the two sisters escaped, Natasha didn't elaborate, but Emma, who was sitting opposite her, knew it clearly, and gently pulled Joaquin's sleeve. "Honey, come make a cocktail with me." When the two came to the small wine cabinet, Emma said softly while pouring wine into the stainless steel brewing cup, "The little girl is not telling the truth. Her sister has 2 abilities just like me. The reason they escaped is because of her sister's awakened second ability, teleportation." "Aha, this is really good news." Joaquin, who was shaking the mixing cup, twitched the corner of his mouth. "Is it the combination of Mystique and the Red Devil Asazo? What an unexpected harvest." Soon the two returned to their seats with glasses of wine in their hands. Joaquin pushed a glass of cocktail with a straw in front of Natasha. "Do you trust us that much?" Natasha was silent for a moment. "At least you don't hate me like a monster." Although the underground living area is not easy to see the sun, there is no shortage of other daily necessities, and there are companions to chat with for entertainment. Maybe it is true as Professor Connors said. "Can you develop a potion that can make our sisters recover? I don't like to go round and round, so I told you directly." Joaquin took a sip of his drink. "My company is called Ark Group. On the surface, it researches some drugs to overcome diseases. In private, it researches how to make Ypsilon mutants degenerate into the previous form of ordinary people. And how to use the mature X gene to evolve ordinary people into mutants." Looking at Natasha, whose eyes were getting bigger and bigger, Joaquin lit a cigarette, pointed at himself with the finger holding the cigarette, and said to Emma beside him, "We are the same as you, the 3 of us are the same. Do you know why I study these?" Looking at Natasha shaking his head, Joaquin nodded his heart. "Because I was used as a guinea pig by human beings, locked up in the base for research all day long, cut off a piece of my flesh today, and let a caddy of blood out of me tomorrow, until I escaped from that hell. Since then, I have seen the faces of these human beings clearly. He tightened his fists. Either we are stronger than them, the stronger we are, the less they dare to hurt us, or they will also become mutants, and then naturally no one will oppose us who are alive. Emma sat beside Natasha, lovingly touching her wings. You have either been imprisoned by yourself or forced to be imprisoned these years. Don't you want to walk in the sun in an open and above-board manner? I really, can I? Looking at Natasha's expectant eyes, Joaquin nodded. Of course, our group has actually applied for a large piece of land from a neighbor's house to build a pasture. The dimensions there are similar to your hometown. Maybe you will like it there. He made a move with his left hand, and a small globe landed in his hand. He turned the globe and clicked on a piece of land. Our group is in the neighboring province of Quebec, but we bought a large piece of land with a nearly 200-year right to use it at a huge price. It is a private land. In fact, the bases you live in now will all be moved there in the near future. With Joaquin's continuous narration and Emma's spiritual hints, Natasha's thoughts began to move closer to the blueprint shown by Joaquin. Blue sky and white clouds, warm sun and green pastures appeared in her mind, cattle and sheep grazing leisurely, and herself walking among them. When she was bored, she could spread her wings and fly high. Knock knock knock. Dasha. Knock knock knock. Dasha. Emma withdrew her right index finger pressing on her temple, and shook her head at Joaquin who was beside her. No one is here. Instead, the door opposite the apartment suddenly opened, and a middle-aged man with a beard murmured dissatisfiedly, "What's the knock at night? Why don't you let people sleep?" The next moment, his expression was a little dull, and he closed the door blankly. Emma looked at the anxious Natasha and smiled triumphantly. "Maybe your little Dasha is looking around for your whereabouts." Joaquin's slender fingers grasped the air, and the metal doorknob creaked, and then some dilapidated wooden doors creaked open. After the three of them entered, Natasha turned on the fluorescent light in the living room. Looking at the normal layout of the room, she breathed a sigh of relief. It seems that Dasha still knows how to clean the house. Haha, girls, it's natural to love cleanliness. Joaquin sat on the sofa and lit a cigarette. By the way, I forgot to ask you, how did you get brought to Boston? Natasha's beak opened. Last month, I waited for Dasha to come home as usual, but I waited and waited until she didn't come home. I was too worried, so I wanted to go downstairs to have a look. While wandering downstairs, I bumped into a man, and was pointed at a gun by him and taken to a tavern not far away. They escorted me into a car that night, and after a few twists and turns, I came to Boston. Joaquin and Emma listened straight to each other. Is that okay? Wilson's men are talented. As time passed, until the middle of the night, the wooden floor outside the door began to scream, creak, creak. Who's in my house? The rough voice made the dozing Natasha wake up instantly. Dasha, it's me, Natasha. Sister. A strong man with a height of at least 2 meters appeared at the door. His thick body was like a wall, covering the door tightly. He looked at Joaquin and Emma sitting beside Natasha, and frowned. Who are you? Let me introduce myself first. Joaquin stood up and smiled slightly at the strong man. Joachim, the boss who can bring you sisters a new life. Do you think I'm an idiot? A swarthy pistol was placed on Joaquin's forehead, and the strong man laughed grinningly. You hid my sister for nearly a month, and now you use her as bait to lure me out. Do you really think I don't know? What can you do if you know? Joaquin's smile remained unchanged, but the pistol on his forehead began to deform, and finally, under the stunned gaze of the strong man, it was completely reduced to a piece of scrap iron. He stretched out his right hand. Just like your sister, join us, we are one. Dasha. Natasha also walked to Joaquin's side. At this time, the claws at the end of her wings were slowly stroking the big man's face. My sister doesn't want to live in hiding anymore. My sister wants to live in the sun with dignity. The boss can give me the life I want. Looking at Natasha with tears in his eyes, the body of the strong man shrank rapidly, and the clothes on his body fell loosely on the ground, and a slightly thin figure appeared in front of Joaquin. He has long, jet black hair, and his whole body is red and covered with flat scales like crocodiles. His facial features are very delicate, and the scales on his forehead are very regular, more like a pattern. Under the black eyebrows are a pair of golden eyes, the pupils stand up like cold-blooded animals, and the small mouth under the bridge of the tall nose is tightly pursed. Her undeveloped figure was a bit thin, but Joaquin stared at little Dasha's lower abdomen as if she had discovered a new world. There were faint abdominal muscles there, and a long tail flicked behind her. The tip of the tail was an inverted triangle, like a barbed arrow. Looking at little Dasha, who was covering her body with a leather jacket, Joaquin looked at her weird eyes, stretched out his right hand and smiled gently. Don't hide yourself, you are the real you now, cute little Dasha. Don't you feel ugly when I look like this? Little Dasha's voice was waxy, but it conveyed an important message to Joaquin. The little girl was not confident about her appearance. He squatted down and pressed his forehead against little Dasha's forehead, and the two of them looked at each other. To others, you look like a demon, but to us, who are also mutants, you are as cute as an angel. Because we are one, and that cannot be changed. Welcome to join us, my name is Emma Frost. Emma squatted down and kissed her on the cheek. I will be your older sister from now on. With me around, no one will bully you and Natasha. Can you tell me your decision now? Looking at the sincere eyes of the two and the expectant expression of her elder sister Natasha, little Dasha smiled. We are one. Joaquin laughed, followed by Emma and the sisters. Since taking little Dasha under his command, he has been in a good mood until one morning. Joaquin raised his eyebrows because of a newspaper article, but that was all. Pym Hank established his own Pym Group, and the building is not far from the Ark Group. Pym Hank's departure, presumably Howard Stark's mood will not be too beautiful, but what does this have to do with me? Although the Pym particles are very attractive, there are not a few people who are greedy, but he knows that it is not his turn to grab them now, and the Snake and Shield Bureau will not agree to it first. After all, the Hydra lurking in the Snake and Shield Bureau are not one body. Except for Warwick, who took over from Whitehall, the other branches have their own personnel lurking in it, not to mention the old Yinby Pierce. Instead of exposing yourself, who is still very weak now, it is better to develop slowly and slowly. As long as you walk into the path of transformation, it is not certain who will have the last laugh. Speaking of evolution, it seems that my magnetic field ability has never broken through to the gamma level. Do you want to go to Poland? Anyway, that person's control of the magnetic field has definitely reached the peak. I just don't know if I can fool him to my side. With the mentality of giving it a try, the two dealt with the affairs of the group and set off for a small town in southern Poland. At this time, Magneto withdrew Eric's alias and used his original name Max. It's easy to find Eric. There is only one steel factory in the whole town, so this afternoon, Joaquin and Emma came to the doorman of the steel factory with their luggage and some gifts they bought. Hello, I'm looking for Max Eisenhart. Soon, Eric, who was covered in sweat and dirty, came to the door, looked at the next two people with slightly wrinkled brows, and focused on Emma. You are very similar to a friend of mine. Emma smiled politely. That friend of yours is my teacher, and I am honored to have the same name as her. Joaquin, a mutant. Looking at Joaquin's extended right hand, Eric shook hands with him, and then his eyelids involuntarily raised. He sensed a large amount of alloy elements from this man. Weird. Joaquin let go of his hand with a smile. I was once captured by humans for experiments, so I left an alloy skeleton in my body. I'm tired, maybe you guys came at the wrong time. Eric thought that these two people were here to recruit him, but after that incident, he no longer had the ambition he had at the beginning. At this time, he just wanted to be a good husband and father. No, maybe you misunderstood me. Joaquin spread his right hand, and some iron filings on the ground gathered in his palm. Looking at the whirling iron filings, Eric raised his right eyebrow. Magnetic field control. Yes, since my awakening to now, the control of the magnetic field has not broken through to the gamma level. On the one hand, it may be limited by my talent. On the other hand, maybe I should find a teacher. Looking at the smiling Joaquin, Eric pondered for a moment. Isn't it good to be an ordinary person? Why are you willing to be an ordinary person when you can control your own life and death? He bowed to Eric. Please help me. Teacher. Eric ignored him, but looked at Emma. What about you? We are one. What a familiar sentence. Looking at the face that was 80% similar to that of his old friend, Eric helped Joaquin up. Wait for me. Seeing Eric, who turned and walked into the factory building, Joaquin and Emma looked at each other and smiled. Eric, who quickly put on his coat, led the two of them to the outskirts of the town. Walking on the lush country road, he was in a very peaceful state of mind. When he thought of his wife and daughter waiting at home, the corners of his mouth couldn't help but rise. Dad, the little loli with long brown hair left behind the animals she was playing with, and bumped into Eric's arms with her short legs. Daddy came back so early today. Haha, because Dad misses Nina. Holding Nina in front of the two of them, call me brother and sister. Hello brother and sister. Hello, what a lovely little girl. Emma reached out and pinched her face, then opened the bag that she had been carrying all the way, and took out a lot of snacks and a delicate doll from it. It's our first meeting, this is a gift from Sister Emma. Thank you, Sister Emma. Nina, who was put down by Eric, was happily holding the doll, eating the snacks fed by Emma. Her beautiful big eyes narrowed into crescent moons, and Joaquin touched her head. It's so cute. It just so happens that there is a guest room at home, you and Emma. Joaquin nodded, just as the teacher thought. Who is this? Magda, who had been busy in the house, came out and looked at Eric with some doubts. The latter briefly introduced. Joaquin and Emma will stay with us for a while. Hi, I'm Joaquin, you can call me Jin. Hello, Magda. The three of them entered this not-so-small wooden house, and Magda stood at the door of the room. I hope you can get used to it. Thank you. Due to the arrival of guests, the dinner Magda originally prepared was a bit unsatisfactory and had to be prepared again, while Eric leaned on the door frame, with his hands in his pockets watching Joaquin make the bed. Have you seen Charles? Of course, an elder who has benign illusions about human beings. Put your emotions into it, whether it's happiness, warmth, sadness or anger, concentrate all your emotions on one point, center on this point, spread around, and then fully grasp this power. In the yard of the steel factory in the middle of the night, Eric stood beside Joaquin who was trembling all over, and narrated his experience in controlling the magnetic field. While talking, he looked at Joaquin who was trying to control the iron ingot. In him, Eric seemed to see himself, the same youthful flamboyance, and the same pleasure of pursuing power. Emma, you can use your spiritual perception ability to help Jin enter that peaceful state of mind. Facing Eric's guidance, Emma could only shrug her shoulders and spread her hands, and then nodded her head with her right index finger. Actually, neither I nor Professor Charles can penetrate Jin's brain with sensing ability, because his whole body is made of adamantium alloy, especially the head part. The alloy is doped with other unknown metal elements, which can completely isolate our ability. Grandma, Grandma. The grandma lying on the hospital bed didn't hear his cries, and closed her eyes peacefully, but before she closed her eyes, who would know the pain she suffered? Son, we can't beat his family. The thin and honest father, and the knife-mouthed bean-curd-hearted mother, could only kneel in front of the hospital bed and shed tears. Joaquin clasped his hands but could do nothing. What kind of world is this? When is the life of a dog more important than a human? I cannot be reconciled. Trapped in the memories of the past, Joaquin's eyes began to turn red. When he stabbed the pig's knife into the throat of that family, the pleasure of revenge made him calm down, and the corners of his mouth curled up. Grandma. Eric, who was still rambling, looked at the bundles of floating steel and smacked his lips for a moment, not knowing what to say. Eric, who had witnessed Joaquin's emotional changes, sighed secretly. Is anger and hatred the only means to improve strength? Great, finally broke through. Emma happily stepped forward and hugged Joaquin's neck, and offered her own sweet kiss. Honey, you did it. I did it. Joaquin manipulated the steel to fly randomly in midair, as easily as his fingers, and soon he put the steel back to its original position, and turned to look at the silent Eric. Teacher, I did it. But the emotions you just exploded will become an obstacle for you to reach the alpha level. If you want to break through the alpha level, you can't just have hatred. Hatred will make you lose your true self, and even be trapped in the gamma level for the rest of your life. Looking at the melancholy Eric, Joaquin laughed instead. For me, the gamma level is enough for me, teacher. After all, I can't appear in the eyes of other forces with integrity. Among the human forces, only S.H.I.E.L.D., Hydra, and the military where the lunatic is. They only know that I have super self-healing ability and adamantium alloy, and they don't know anything else. After all, I have been asleep for 6 years. If they want to deal with me, magnetic field control will be a surprise for them. Quote. Maybe. He sighed and turned to walk towards home. Joaquin and Emma followed behind him. When he came to the guard room, Emma turned to look at the guard sitting in the guard room. The guard who was sitting straight fell asleep on the table with a plop. The three of them came once a month ago in the middle of the night, but that time Joaquin couldn't control the stack of steel on the ground no matter what method he used. Eric saw his problem at a glance, and he didn't teach him the skills of control. He just let him and Emma play and relax with little Nina every day, trying to use the gentleness of nature to soothe his spiritual anger. 1 month is neither long nor short, but it can calm Joaquin's impetuous heart a lot. This is why he made the second attempt today. I didn't expect him to go to the side of hatred. Is it fate? Teacher, have you ever thought about taking Nina to live in the beautiful country? On the way back, Joaquin still asked this question, and Eric turned around abruptly, staring at Joaquin with flat eyes. I live a good life here, I don't want to be hunted down endlessly, I'm tired of Jin, now I have a wife and children, I must fulfill the duties of a man. All right, Joaquin shrugged. Emma and I will stay with Nina for a few more days. Yes, fate is such a mysterious thing, no one can explain it clearly. For example, Eric at this time, looking at the crimson molten iron pot and the frightened workers, he still couldn't help but take a shot, controlled the iron pot that was about to fall, and then continued to work as if nothing had happened. Looking at those coworkers with weird catalogs in the workplace, he sighed secretly, and hurried back home as soon as he got off work. In the yard, Joaquin let Nina sit on his neck and laughed. Cuckoo. Looking at his daughter's happy little face, Eric hid his worries in his heart, and stepped forward to join in. The three of them played in the yard to their heart's content. In the kitchen window, Magda and Emma were preparing dinner, and they looked at the three of them with a smile on their faces. While enjoying a sumptuous dinner, Emma glanced at Eric, who was somewhat absent-minded, exposed. Eric took a sip of the pumpkin soup, hummed lightly, and then looked at Magda at the side. Let's pack our bags after dinner. I still have a few friends in Munich. Maybe we should change our city life. Okay. Magda knew about her man's past, so she ate very quickly. After all, it took time to pack things. Joaquin forked a piece of beef for Nina. Eat more to grow taller. Will Nina be as beautiful as Sister Emma when she grows up? Seeing the innocent face of Nina, Emma smiled and nodded her nose. Of course, the premise is that you have to eat well, picky eaters will not become beautiful. Eric looked at Nina, who was eating big mouthfuls, and his smile replaced the previous worry. After the meal, Eric and Magda were packing up. Nina was holding the doll Emma gave her, and stood at the door with a puzzled expression. Dad, why are we moving? Because Dad found a better job. Eric squatted down and kissed her on the forehead. Would you like to go and play with Sister Emma? Sister Emma and brother Joaquin went out, saying they were going to the town to do something. Then go back to your room and rest. Good. Sending away little Nina, Eric's premonition is getting worse and worse. In fact, the current Joaquin is the same as himself after executing Xiao when he was young, and he has no kindness towards human beings at all. This is very dangerous. While thinking about things on his mind, he packed up his things, and when they were almost done packing, Joaquin and Emma appeared at the door of the room. Where's little Nina? Okay. Eric froze for a moment, then ran to Nina's room, which was empty. They exchanged glances and rushed out of the room, running to the woods behind, maybe your animal friends who were reluctant to part with her. The greater the expectation, the greater the disappointment. Little Nina was found, but she was surrounded by dozens of local police and soldiers. The bearded leader raised the hemp rope in his hand. Eric Lansher, come with us, you are too dangerous. Facing the target they want to arrest, they naturally wouldn't foolishly carry metal objects on their bodies, and even replace their firearms with bows and arrows. Just as Eric was about to step forward, Joaquin grinned. Do you lack the minimum respect for us? Gold. Eric wanted to stop Joaquin, but the next moment Joaquin appeared in front of the bearded man and crushed his neck. Little Nina was also held in his arms, and the massacre followed. My God. Magda covered her mouth in disbelief. At this time, Joaquin, who wanted to kill the police, was usually gentle and gentle. After returning the frightened Nina to Magda, Joaquin's eyes were red when he saw the two fleeing soldiers. Then, two laser sights cut them off at the waist. Actually, they were not at fault. Eric frowned and looked at Joaquin, who was enjoying himself. You are forcing me. No, teacher, you misunderstood. This has nothing to do with you. Maybe the ordinary life has wiped out your will, but no matter what, you are the same as us, we are one. Isn't this what you declared at the beginning? He looked at Eric with a smile, and nodded his heart with his right hand. I have always kept your motto in mind. You, me, Emma, Nina, we're mutants, and we are one. You know, this is not the life I want now, don't force me. Joaquin pulled Emma back 2 steps. Anyway, you helped me break through to the gamma level. I saved Nina's life today. We're even, right? I hope you can live the life you want. Goodbye, little Nina. Emma waved her finger at Nina, watched the family of 3 go away, then turned to look at Joaquin. We should go back too. No, we have to help him one last time. Joaquin smiled and took Emma to use teleportation, came to a hotel in the small town, and waited for the arrival of the next day, while the 3 members of Eric's family were fully dressed, carrying their bags and boarded the truck to other cities overnight, and the price was a small piece of gold. Gentlemen, the workers who were working stopped what they were doing and looked at a man and a woman standing at the gate of the factory. The 2 wore black masks and stared at them coldly. A man stepped forward and looked at Joaquin. Who are you looking for? Who went to the police station to inform you yesterday? Stand up and I won't kill the others. The 3 men shrank back, but it was of no avail, because Emma had already read their psychological activities clearly. With her hooking her fingers, the 3 men in hard hats walked towards Joaquin with dull eyes. Go away. Joaquin pushed away the man standing in front of him. Where did Eric hurt you? As far as I know, you have worked together for many years, right? You even saved someone yesterday. If it wasn't for Eric, would he still be alive? The more Joaquin spoke, the angrier he became. The steel in the entire workshop began to vibrate, and those people shrank back in fright. The 3 whistleblowers were chained up in the air, kicking their legs helplessly until they remained motionless. After finishing all this, his black eyes scanned the crowd, and then he put his hands on Emma's shoulders and left. Seeing the 2 people who suddenly disappeared, other workers hurried forward to hug the dead worker. Shoo! The 2 appeared beside a muddy road outside the town, waiting patiently for the bus to other cities. Joaquin had just lit a cigarette and took 2 puffs when a bright purple light appeared on the opposite side of the road. Emma instantly entered the diamond form, and Joaquin's eyes shot out ultra-high temperature laser light, but was blocked by the strange-looking big man on the opposite side, and his black and purple lips grinned. My child, we are compatriots. Joaquin stopped the ray, still staring at the strange man and the 3 figures behind him warily. Then you, or who are you? He asked like this in his mouth, but he also panicked in his heart. This hanger is 100 and 1,000 of himself, and he can't beat the opponent. Shouldn't he go to Eric? Why did you come to find yourself? I am the ancestor of the mutants. Apocalypse, child, join us. Looking at Tianqi's outstretched right hand, Joaquin thought twice, and pulled Emma to his side. What can I do for you? Looking at Joaquin, who is so upright, Tianqi smiled faintly. You will become my 4th guardian knight. Guardian knight, Emma murmured softly, but the spiritual perception was used habitually on Tianqi. Maybe it was due to his mutual affection as a mutant, or because he didn't like Emma's weak mental power. Tianqi nodded his head with a good temper. Don't use this power on others at will. Sorry. Emma shrugged and stopped talking, but looked at the people around her, a white-haired black girl, an Asian girl with purple eyes, and a blonde boy with steel wings. The boy was ignored by her, but the energy fluctuations in the 2 little girls were very strong, at least much stronger than the energy of herself and Jin. Shoo! A group of people were teleported to a small island with dense smoke pipes. Apocalypse led them into the base below one of the smoke pipes. There were cages, secret rooms, abandoned test benches, and mottled blood on the ground and walls. Joaquin became more and more familiar with it. As Tianqi's eyes turned white, the memory fragments in the depths of Joaquin's mind were connected. Stryker's hideous ugly face, and the painful cries of the previous consciousness, presented in his mind one by one, becoming more and more clear. It's really hard to check your memory, little guy. Tianqi smiled. Have you forgotten the pain and despair you endured here when you were young? How could you forget? Joaquin clenched his fists tightly and his eyes were red. With the spread of the magnetic field he controlled, the steel in this abandoned base began to levitate and collide, and even squeezed and deformed. Tianqi's eyes turned white, and he began to strengthen Joaquin's control ability. With the help of Tianqi, the alpha-level obstacles were like a piece of paper that could be torn apart, and the control power continued to increase crazily, until Joaquin floated in midair, flying higher and higher and piercing through the thick mud layer of the base. Looking at the island under his feet, Joaquin let out a smirk and spread his hands. Is this the real ability of magnetic field control? It feels so wonderful. Feeling the unparalleled control, he is very satisfied with his trip this time. Next, as long as he is a qualified second to fifth boy, and waits for the full-body Charles to take the lead to eliminate this 1,000-year-old peg, this power will belong to him. Boom, boom, the chimneys collapsed one after another, and countless workers ran out. Looking at the scene that seemed like the end of the world, they all felt despair in their hearts. Fortunately, all these came and went quickly. How do you feel, my child? Looking at Tianqi's smiling face, Joaquin lowered his head. This feels great. Before Joaquin could speak, Tianqi looked at Emma. My child, I have never seen your second ability. Besides being able to perceive other people's thoughts, does it have other functions? Emma recalled the teacher's previous teachings, and then said, if the spiritual ability is developed to the extreme, you can control the thoughts of other people in a large area, and let them do whatever you want. Speaking of this, she shrugged, but as you can feel, my ability is still very weak. Is it? Tianqi rolled his eyes and quickly returned to normal. You try now. Emma closed her eyes and carefully perceived the changes brought about by her ability. She was pleasantly surprised to find that her telepathic range had expanded by at least 20 times compared to before, and she easily manipulated a dazed worker, picked up a stone on the ground, and smashed the head of a worker beside her. This ability to control the life and death of others makes her feel wonderful. Eric, sitting on the plane with his eyes closed, Eric opened his eyes suddenly. Charles, who was wearing an induction booster in the base, hurriedly asked, do you know who is manipulating the magnetic field? Eric was stunned. Manipulate the magnetic field? Don't be kidding, the whole planet except me. He was taken aback suddenly. What happened? All the facilities on 3 Mile Island were completely destroyed by a mutant who manipulated the magnetic field. You may not feel it in the sky, but we can clearly receive that huge energy here. It definitely surpasses you and reaches the unattainable Omega level. Eric laughed suddenly. Don't be kidding, Charles, there is no mutant on the entire planet who has better control than me, especially the control of the magnetic field. No, maybe someone can. Who? Ancient mutants. Apocalypse. While they were chatting through telepathy, Tianqi, who was far away on 3 Mile Island, keenly felt this huge psychic ability. After all, this ability to reach global coverage was something he had never seen before in thousands of years. This gave him the idea of taking it for himself. So he rolled his eyes, followed this brainwave and successfully invaded Charles's mind. The people on the side didn't say much, but stood beside him, waiting quietly. And Charles in the base suddenly had a weird facial expression, his blue eyes were dark, and the figure of Tianqi appeared in the depths of his mind. Feeling this ability to give and take anything, Tianqi raised his head and opened his arms. How can a human being dare to stand on the head of a mutant? With a thought in his mind, at the same moment on the planet, the missile launchers equipped with truth, operated by the soldiers controlled by Tianqi, all launched straight into the sky, leaving a string of tail smoke. The military generals who got the news quickly met in the underground fortifications to discuss countermeasures. Following the new master, Stryker smiled meaningfully, leaned over to a general's ear and said, only Professor X Charles has this ability in the entire planet. The general nodded without saying a word, but waited for this wave of truth to wash away. Only after this wave of attacks could they retaliate. Who would have thought that the following report would be sent soon, and all truth warheads had been launched into outer space? That is to say, human beings now have no bargaining chips to threaten mutants. Strike, take someone to Xavier College and invite Professor Charles. Yes, Charles gave a military salute, turned and left the fortification. The corners of his mouth could not be restrained. After all, there were a large number of experimental subjects and materials in that academy. After accomplishing what he wanted, Tianqi loosened his control over Charles, and was freed by the other party. Alex almost ruined the amplification room. Looking at the pained professor, Alex straightened his chest, and the thick and long shock wave shot out. With the cutting of the high position, his hands also released energy. The beast Hank behind him took the opportunity to take off the helmet on Charles's head. Raven pushed the wheelchair out of the augmentation room first, followed by Hank and Alex. The three of them pushed the unconscious Charles for a few steps, and a purple energy shield appeared at the end of the passage. As the energy shield dissipated, Tianchi brought Joaquin and his party to appear opposite them. Joaquin raised his hand, and the wheelchair carrying Charles flew in front of them. Alex quickly launched a shock wave, but was sent away by the opponent first. The crimson energy passed through the passage and hit an engine of the aircraft in the hangar. Boom. As if feeling something, Eric on the plane greeted Magda a few times, then used the emergency door to jump out of the plane while going to the toilet, and landed steadily in a corner of the city. He got into the phone booth and dialed a number that he hadn't contacted for a long time. After a long time, Azazuo, I'm Eric. On the other side, the mutants rescued by Quicksilver, just rejoicing that they were saved, a few helicopters parked on the lawn. Ravington felt bad, especially when Stryker's ugly old face appeared in front of her. She just shouted, "Attention." Stryker also gave the order, "Fire." Boom boom boom. The special stun gun stunned all the mutants. Only Chin, Scott and Nightcrawler, who were the farthest away, hid behind a broken wall in advance. Looking at the sleeping mutants all over the floor, Stryker smiled proudly, "Get Mystique away first, and don't let the others go." Yes. The three bewildered men watched the soldiers carry Hank and the others onto the plane, and the Nightwalker also took the piano and Scott teleported to the plane. Looking at the unconscious people, the Nightwalker grabbed Mystique's calf and used teleportation but found that there was no effect. The three people who were imprisoned could only sit on the plane and sigh, and soon the plane landed at Stryker's new base, Alclay Lake Base. The first time the soldiers opened the hatch, due to the gap in the magnetic field being opened, Chin, who had recovered her ability, took the lead in using her ability, making several transporting soldiers blind and escaped the catastrophe. Boom, boom. The beast Hank, who had recovered to his original body, kept hitting the iron door with his shoulders. He used to be so powerful, but now he was as weak as an ordinary person. Rui Wen, who also recovered to his original form, looked around for a while, and finally saw Stryker with a strange smile behind a glass. "You know, Stryker, we are not malicious." "That's what you think." Stryker propped his hands on the operating table, staring at several people coldly. "Did Charles launch the missile? Where is he?" "We didn't do it." Ruiwin shook her head. "It's a mutant who has never seen before. He invaded Charles's consciousness and manipulated Charles to launch a missile. There are several other powerful mutants around him, and one of them is more powerful than Eric." "You sure?" Stryker is not calm anymore. "It is better than Charles saying that if he is controlled, he will be controlled. Magneto King Eric's destructive power is obvious to all. A mutant who is stronger than him is something that is unimaginable. Listen to the human beings all over the world. I am the ancestor of mutants, Apocalypse. During the years of my sleep, my descendants have been persecuted endlessly by you humans. In return, your human civilization will be destroyed. Only mutants are the masters of this planet." The sudden sound made Stryker's eyelids twitch non-stop, and he looked at several subordinates around him. They also looked at him in horror, which made him take a deep breath. Just as he was about to ask for some information, he received a communication from his subordinates. "Colonel, there are mutant invaders at the base. Catch them." Stryker didn't care about other things, and it was the right thing to deal with those little mice first, and the three Nightwalkers who were constantly teleporting in the base entered a research room. There was a large sealed iron box in the middle, and there were waves of roars inside, like beasts and more like humans. "Hutchie, Hutchie." A strong, naked figure came out from the opened iron door, with strange instruments attached to his body and head. He scanned around, and suddenly his ears moved, and then 6 long metal claws protruded from his fists. The first time Stryker opened the door, he couldn't help but swear, "Thick, Lee Crab." After speaking, he turned around and ran, and the beast was released. God knows who can resist him without the Death Girl, so he slipped away first, but he ran away, but the soldiers who stayed behind were in bad luck. They were killed and routed. Bang! Logan kicked open the iron gate and looked at the white snow and woods outside. He threw off the instruments on his body and head, escaped from this cage, and disappeared into the vast sea of snow. "Eric, long time no see, you seem to have gained some weight." In a dim tavern, Asazo and Eric were drinking and chatting about their respective experiences after separation, until the voice of the Apocalypse resounded in their ears, followed by Charles's weak voice, "Cairo, we are in Cairo." Eric raised his head and drank the wine in the glass. Go to your place to change your clothes first, Charles and the others are in Cairo. Okay. Azazuo put his right hand on Eric's shoulder and disappeared in the next second. At this time, across the Nile River, Tianchi and his team stood on a mountain peak, looking at the city on the other side of the Nile. Tianchi slowly raised his hands. We mutants once ruled the world, and those humans regarded us as gods. Now that I am back, we mutants are still the masters of this world. Following his narration, the bustling city of Cairo has become a hell on earth, and countless high-rise buildings have been turned into wind and sand, and under the control of Apocalypse, they have been turned into huge stones, and finally formed an incomparable pyramid. Joaquin, Emma, Spirit Butterfly, Aurora, Angel, and even Charles, who woke up, looked at the huge pyramid, and their hearts were filled with shock. Tianchi turned around and put his hands on both sides of Joaquin's body, and a lot of wind and sand wrapped Joaquin. After a long time, as the wind and sand receded, Joaquin in black tight-fitting armor appeared in front of several people. Under the sealed helmet, only a pair of black eyes gleamed. Tianchi patted him on the shoulder. This armor can also increase your ability again. Let's destroy and vent to your heart's content. Let those humans see the true ability of mutants. As you wish. Joaquin spread his hands and his figure rose into the air. The next moment, a large amount of iron elements, various rare metals, and even the steel bars in the building all rose into the air. He could manipulate any objects with metal properties as he wished. The planet began to tremble slightly under his control. Far away on the other side of the planet, there is a country that lives a good life. On this day, they ushered in an unforgettable scene. The Beijing Tower, which was once proud, collapsed and knocked two adjacent buildings. Cars, subways, and bullet trains flew into the air under the control of unknown energy. Numerous scraps of iron smashed and devoured these cars, and became nourishment for strengthening oneself. Submarines, freighters and warships lurking and hidden in the sea were all twisted into twists and completely sank into the depths of the sea. The bandy-legged were crying and running in all directions. Perhaps running away with all their strength would make them forget their fear for a short time. The universe kingdom adjacent to them also suffered the same fate. Thick, Lee Crab. On the plane that arrived, Kuayin looked out the window and couldn't help swearing. Nightcrawler pulled off his sleeve and pointed at Joaquin in midair with his sharp fingertips. Look at that man. Except for Hank, who was flying the plane, the others all looked out the window. Joaquin, who was like a god, left an indelible impression on them. Quicksilver, take me to find that person and see if it's Eric. As soon as the fighter plane landed, Ruiwen pulled Kuayin like Joaquin and rushed over. Looking at the surging ruins, Kuayin hugged Ruiwen and started running. When he came to Joaquin, he was blocked by a magnetic field cover. Hey, Eric. Joaquin's skin under the helmet twitched, cursing inwardly, are you blind? Eric is taller than me. I have a good figure. Joaquin just turned his head and stared at her. A stone mixed with steel bars blasted Ruiwen to the ground, and was rescued by Kuayin, who was full of horsepower. Ruiwen stood firm and shook her head with a wry smile. It seems that it is not him. Then what do we do now? Kuayin looked at the scene like the end of the world. To be honest, he was a little timid now. Although he was very fast, he couldn't bear the strength of his body. If he didn't pay attention to himself, he would feel cold. Several other people were also searching for places where Charles might be hidden. Just when Ruiwen and Kuayin were at a loss, red smoke appeared in front of them. After seeing the person clearly, Ruiwen stepped forward and hugged Eric, who was fully dressed. Kuayin looked at the man in front of him and opened his mouth to say, "Hi Dad, I am your long-lost son." But the words came to my lips, and finally became, "Hi. Need my help?" Asazuo raised his eyebrows at Ruiwen, and Ruiwen hugged him happily, "Thank you. By the way, that mutant is really powerful. How could we split up when Eric was so strong?" Hearing Asazo's emotion in his ears, Eric slowly floated into the air, squeezed into the magnetic field shield with great effort, and after meeting this mysterious mutant face to face, looking at the familiar figure and black eyes, Eric sighed, "Jin, stop it. Haha, teacher, you really shouldn't have rejected Tianchi back then." Joaquin behind the helmet smiled meaningfully. "Teacher, instead of stopping me here, why not find your good friend Charles? Tianchi is very greedy for his body, and he is swapping souls somewhere." "What, Eric got goosebumps when he heard that. If he had Charles's body, then this planet would really suffer. Thinking of this, he took a deep look at Joaquin, turned around and flew towards the pyramid. The direction of his flight pointed out the direction for others. After all, everyone is not an idiot. Charles gave up the mutant and flew into the pyramid instead, indicating that Professor Charles was inside. The fastest ones are Azazuo and Nightcrawler, and they were the two who fought first, because the first level was Emma, who was restless. As her psychic ability invaded Nightcrawler's brain, the dark-eyed Nightcrawler instantly transformed from a justice fighter into a young boy, grabbing Azazel's tail and throwing it back. Azazuo glanced at Emma, and rolled his eyes to know her identity. After all, this little girl helped find a good family by herself back then, but she never expected to give herself such a big surprise when they met for the second time. Relying on his physical strength, the beast Hank climbed to a passage of the pyramid on all fours. Just as he stood firm, he was knocked down by the angel who swooped in. He swung his arm swiftly and caught the angel's left ankle. The two fought from midair to the ground. Eric spread his hands and flew to a passageway. An Asian woman held an energy lightsaber and an energy whip in her hand. She looked at the legend of the mutants before, pouted and rushed up. What greeted her was a storm of steel. Hela, Lingdi launched a steel storm with a simple sword, and flicked the energy whip in his left hand. When the whip was about to wrap around Eric's neck, a deformed tool steel blocked him. Puff, puff, two hot eyes came from behind Eric, and the scorching energy hit the energy whip. The two forces offset each other, and Scott ran over slightly panting. Ha, 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 are you okay? The little guy is good. Eric glanced at Scott, and pulled back the 5 fingers of his right hand, and the spirit butterfly flew out from the top of the two of them involuntarily. The spirit butterfly, which fell from the air at a high speed, had no choice but to insert the energy sword formed by the power of thought into the big pyramid to cushion the impact of the fall. Finally, it rolled twice on the ground and stood up in a slightly embarrassed way. Angel. The angel fighting with Hank slammed a pair of steel wings and flew towards the passage, but Chin, who was about to climb up to the entrance, pulled it with his thoughts. The angel lost his balance and hit the wall outside the pyramid, wobbly falling to the ground. Kuai-yin took Ruiwen to run around in the pyramid. Not here. Not here. Aha, I found it. At this time, Charles and Tianchi were lying side by side. A powerful thought force overflowed from Tianchi's body, and poured into Charles's body. All this was very painful. With the invasion of Tianchi's thinking, his hair fell off in pieces and was painful. Charles. Ruiwen looked at her friend in agony, or the man called her brother, and wanted to help, but found that she couldn't do anything. I'm going to find help. Kuai-yin came to the exit with a whoosh, looked around the situation, found Chin who was still climbing, and immediately went forward to carry her back to Charles. Quickly think of a way. I need Nightcrawler's help. Chin put her hands around Charles's bald head, and used her own thoughts to help him resist the intrusion of thoughts from the apocalypse. It is not difficult to see from her flushed face that she is struggling at this time. Let's go find the Nightcrawler. Kuai-yin took Ruiwen out of the pyramid, turned around, and found the Nightcrawler who was still entangled with Azazu. Before the two of them could make a move, Azazuo in midair shouted, "Go and interrupt Emma, this young man is under Emma's control." White Queen. The corner of Ruiwen's mouth twitched. Didn't she abandon the dark and turn to the bright? It's not that Emma, it's a mutant with the same ability as her, right at the first entrance of the pyramid. Okay. Azazuo raised his fist and was about to hit Nightcrawler on the forehead, when he suddenly found the young man in front of him blinking at him. Uncle, why did you hit me? Azazuo rolled his eyes, threw Nightcrawler to Kuai-yin and Ruiwen below, and then disappeared in place. The next second, he appeared behind Aurora, who was competing with Eric. As soon as his tail rolled around Aurora's neck, he tasted the comfort of electrotherapy. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.